That table is still really visible. I have to like rearrange because the camera that I use for YouTube actually gets a lot more of my room than TikTok does, and so I'm kind of rearranging. Um, so I thought let's talk about some other stuff. I love paleoanthropology, but I'll be real. I'm not coming on here so that I can go and do a bunch of research on things. I want to be able to discuss the things that are just interesting to me that I come across, right? And I also, I don't want it to turn into a job. I don't know if I need YouTube mods. I might. There's nobody on YouTube that I know of right now. The way it's set up right now, it's really hard for me to see what's going on over there. Um, but I need to probably add a couple mods once we get above. I haven't had more than like 7 or 8 people on the YouTube channel so far. So once we get above that, we'll need to go ahead and change that. And I need to change the times on the websites. I apologize, I haven't done that yet. Um, I did, however, get a bunch of information on Erectus and Neanderthal up on the website, as well as a few of the more recent Turtle Island Indigenous finds that prove Turtle Island Indigenous truths. If you're looking for any of that stuff, that is up on the website. I'm trying to get everything transferred over. I do have to say that you're not going to get all of my links. I have bookmarks going back like a decade now of several different things, and um, that's a lot of time and effort and a lot of labor. And well, this is all a labor of love. It's not a labor of love that I'm willing to turn into actual labor, because then I will resent it and I won't want to do it anymore. And so you'll get several different ones that I have. And it will give you the ability to research more and to dig a little deeper and to find out. Because please remember that for me, what I am trying to teach you is not just certain aspects that I know, but how you yourself can find these things just a little deeper, right? So that we can all have access to the education that is out there currently, right? We are at an age and a stage where we actually have so much access to such a wide variety of educational knowledge, even the conspiracy theories, right? And so, because of that, um, ignorance now is willful, right? If you are choosing to ignore realities, and choosing to find the most positive, or choosing to not find the most positive path forward, then that's kind of willful. But many of us also don't know how, right? And when you don't know how, that becomes very exhausting, and it blocks you. I'm one of those people that, because of issues in my life, sometimes if I don't know how to do something, it will stop me from doing it, because in the past, when I've tried to do it my own way, somebody has abused me for trying to do it my own way instead of doing it a way that they never told me in the first place, right? And so it's very confusing for me. And so I understand that for a lot of people, it's very, thank you. It's very important. Stop, my dog. I understand that for a lot of people, they don't know how to find this information. So not only do you not know that the information's out there, but you don't know how to access the information once you understand that the information's out there. So a big part of what I do and what I'm trying to do is give people the understanding of how to, right? Because if we are going to talk about knowledge and we're going to learn, you need to learn your own knowledge, right? You can't take my words. As I say all the time, my words are going to change tomorrow, most likely. There is new paleoanthropological stuff coming out every day. There is new evidence. And I don't have access to all the evidence as it is, right? Like, I may have put a few decades into something, but it doesn't mean that I know everything. And I think that anybody who claims to really does, right? Or really doesn't, like, really doesn't. Those that scream the loudest that they are something generally are not, right? The ones that are, I never lie, generally lie. The most intelligent man in the room, if he tells you all the time, is probably not, right? And I don't want you to think that I know everything, because I know that I don't know everything. And I know that that's not just the fact that I haven't found all information on the planet. Have you found all information on the planet? But there's new information in my fields coming out every day, right? So, with that understanding, I want you to be able to understand and dig deeper, because I know that if you can understand and dig deeper, then then the knowledge that you will find along the way will help you to help me, to help our neighbor, to help the animals, to help all of us to do this a little bit better, right? Part of being human and something that we've all been taught. I think this is a pretty cross cultural teaching, right? Is that being human is growing and changing, and doing better for the next generation and doing better for yourself, right? Uh, Now, it doesn't always take effect in action in many cultures, right? But there is this idea that we're trying to make better of something, right? We're trying to create better. And we've reached a state where our better creation, our trying to create better, is leading to our own extinction. So now we have to find a better way. Right now, we have to do this in a more ecologically conscious way, right? In a more humane, conscious way, in a more conscious way, right? We now have to be conscious. We think that we're the only conscious individuals on the planet, but I would argue that sometimes we lack consciousness. Like sometimes we lack consciousness of our actions, right? Dogmen, as in like a group of people that claim the community. Like dogmen can be I think there's a group of soldiers that were dogmen, and there's also like clans in an indigenous community, I believe, or a warrior band in an indigenous community that's been known as dogmen. So I'm not sure what you mean by dogmen, but if you want to clarify, nothing is a different species, though. We're all the same species. We're all Homo sapien. Some of us have a little bit different admixture than others. I put my earrings in backwards today, apparently. You cannot see the lovely wood die cut on them. So let's talk race, because that is the conversation today. I'm going to go ahead and turn off comments for a while, because what we're going to first do is talk why we have a theory of race. It is a pretty low content chat today, which is just fine. But it can still distract me. Again, the YouTube is up on the back, and if you need to ask questions when my comments are off, you can go ahead and do that over there. And if you are following the old YouTube, please go follow the new YouTube. Sorry, I have to switch my earrings around because I put them in the wrong ear because I wasn't looking when I did it. And apparently it's harder to do when I am looking, especially in fuck the. So first, we're going to talk about why we have the theory of race. We started othering people roughly 10,000 years ago. Some newer stuff that I have seen pushes our first violence back as a war level a little bit. Holy fuck, how can I not find it when I'm actually like, there we go. Pushes our idea of violence as a war zone back a little bit to about 20,000 years ago, which is a cemetery in Egypt, Egypt, Kemet. And it is one that I had known of, but I had mixed up because I had done a study on it. And then when I was looking back through the studies, or through the papers that I had gathered for the studies, the only thing that I could find was a different cemetery that was about 9,000 years ago. So this is something that I've been talking about, but I've been dating it at 9,000 years ago, trying to be correct, thinking that one cemetery was a different cemetery, because they're like cicada and cicada or something like that. Like they're like it's just a couple letters different in their name, and so it kind of confused my brain. Sorry about that one. But to be accountable and to be open and honest. So this is to push back about 20,000 years ago in Egypt is our oldest evidence of a war. We do have a massacre in Kenya about 10,000 years ago. There's a new study that came out that I saw an article on today that's pushing back, or that's showing some evidence of violence between Anatolian farmers about 8,000 years ago, and showing this as an early Neolithic farming thing. Uh, all of this really correlates still with the rise of this idea of ownership of territory. So territory is something that, all beings do really, because territory is home. Territory is your home space. When we talk about territory in dogs, or territory in gorillas, or territory in snakes, or territory in badgers, what we're talking about is the space that they have marked out as their home, the biome that feeds them, and the biome that supports them, right? And the space that they live in, right? So we all have this innate need to maintain that. We all have this innate need to have the ability to have a safe space to grow and live, right? And for a few 100,000 years, we all did this within caves that we would live in for several generations, or we would migrate. And when we migrate, we'd have their sleeping quarters, like some form of, the ability to build housing on a pathway or on a migration route is absolutely necessary for us. Though we don't have evidence of it, I personally correlate that we would have had to have had some form of housing. We have other things that would correlate, like the ability to build tools with fire, and the ability to wear clothing and know how to tan out skins to wear clothing, right? Which would give us the ability to make hide houses, right? So when we're looking at that, excuse me. Uh, so when we are going back this far, what we're seeing is groups of people who are in the same spaces for a long period of time. They build bigger communities, and then once you get to a bigger community over a few 100 years, part of your community is going to break off and move on. Okay, look for new space, and how this generally happens. Uh, it's very similar to what we see in any other primate, right? Where a group of children, right? A group of young, there's no room for us. There's no space for us, and so they gather up their family, or their friends, the rest of their group, maybe younger siblings, maybe a parent here or there, and they move on, right? And they'll, go hunting for a new space, and that new space will be their new home for a few 100 years, until they don't have enough space for all of their people in that home, and then they'll move on. And this is how we see our expansion. We do know that after we get into all spaces, that there is trade. There is trade of culture. There is trade of genetics throughout many different spaces, right? We do know that it's very global, very early on. That New studies are showing that the and I've been talking about this actually, and it's not that new studies are showing this; it's that articles are coming out, and these things are coming out and are being brought to light. They've been known within educational or academic spaces, but now they're being brought out. And this is with all these articles. I mean, some of them I just don't know within the same academic space, right? But this is one that I knew of, where we're tracing how the mitochondrial DNA and the Y DNA that is indigenous to Turtle Island and is only found here, has other findings in other zones that are a derivative of it, right? So when we look at mitochondrial DNA, if you look at a haplogroup, and the haplogroup is, in this case, X1, and then you look at another haplogroup that is X, it's X2 in Siberia. That 2 comes from the 1. The first X1 first, X2 comes from X1, is the way that it works, to my understanding, within the way that they quantify mitochondrial DNA. And then they'll trace, like, X1 will trace all the way back to what they call a mitochondrial Eve. They'll generation it back, right? And they can tell by the DNA itself how many generations it goes back. But with mitochondrial DNA, it also is so Y DNA just traces from father to son. I don't have my father's Y DNA. So I have nothing of his grandfather, nothing of his father. I only have his mother's lineage. Okay. So I can't trace anything on my father's father's family, not even my father's father's mother. Okay. I can trace my father's mother and her family through my mitochondrial DNA. Okay. So when we look at that tracing through the mitochondrial DNA, we can look at how many generations a certain mitochondrial lineage goes back. I don't know how they do it. I just know they have the capability and they've talked about it. And so when they find the last of that one, they call that a mitochondrial Eve. We have several that we trace as mitochondrial Eves. It's a common parlance term. Really, all it means is it was maybe the first of maybe it was the one daughter to carry on a genetic path, because my X is a combination that I pass on to my daughters, is a combination of the two X's that I have. And that recombined X kind of becomes its own, right? Or can become its own. And in that, well, it's unique. For me or my sister, it's going to be unique, even if it's a full blooded sister, right? And so that pass on is how we trace that back. In this ability to trace this back, we can see that that migration pattern is constantly moving and has always been moving. But how this migration happens is once you reach a point of max capacity for your area, groups break off and they find a new space so that they're within a max capacity. They have territory, they have home, they have space. Once we take territory into a property ownership idea, once we look into it as I can't move about this territory, right? Once we looked at it as, um, so my cave is my home, it's my primary spot. But if my territory is a 10-mile radius around my home that provides berries to the north and good hunting to the west and water to the south and maybe there's a good stone field to the east, right? But it provides everything that I need, good reeds along the water, right? um, when another group decides that they want to take the water from the river, like dam up the river and dry up my river, then they're owning that space instead of allowing that space to just be a part. They're controlling it, they're adapting it to provide for them without allowing it to provide for the rest, right? When we get to the idea that we need to do that for farming, for agriculture, when we start to look at the water and the need to water and irrigate, right? Need to keep this irrigation going because we are uh, putting stuff in a specific space that often doesn't have water next to it or underground water, which is where these plants start, right? And we've created the need for more water within it. Is when we're really starting to see violence, even if we're pushing it back that far, because we see our first starting of tending along the Nile, right? And we see that going back. We see the development of barley. I believe is up in the Middle East, a little bit further north, and then I think that it's either wheat or barley as well that's in West Africa. Um, and these are both about 10,000 years ago. Barley and wheat are both indigenous in the Middle East, um, as a native plant that grows wild, as not in the not in the large shape that we think of it today. So it's not going to be the wild. It's not going to be something that you're going to visualize and go, oh yeah, that's it. Maybe if you know a little bit. Excuse me. And then along the Nile, you see that this is another native and indigenous space. And the same thing in West Africa when it's starting there. But this changeover control really comes when we see that agricultural cities starting. And agricultural cities really start roughly 10,000 years ago. Now, this doesn't mean that agriculture wasn't supporting on the Nile. It doesn't mean that there wasn't, there may have been the start of field agriculture along the Nile. And we do know that there is the start of small farming in Anatolia, and in different regions of the Middle East, right? That goes back to about 12,000 years ago. But these are small individual subsistence farming. And generally, they're not like you're not going to find a place out in the middle of the desert because that's a lot of water hauling you're going to have to do, right? So you're going to be along a waterway. And because you're a small patch along a waterway and you're taking care of yourself, you're not disrupting a major portion of the biome, right? Like if you take out a 10 by 10 portion of the biome, the roots are still going to find nutrients from other species in the biome, right? But if you take out a 100 by 100 foot, you're going to truly change that because things within that, maybe the things on the outer edge are going to have more nutrients from other parts of the biome, but the things within the center of it have no reach, right? So as you're looking at that coming into Western agriculture taking over around 10,000 years ago as a city building tool, we see that othering starts. And this othering starts in the people in the hills are going to start and take your grain, right? You need to give me your grain so I can feed my army to protect you from the people in the hills who are going to steal it from you. Um, and a lot of this also starts that, anybody who got a little bit too big on those Anatolian plains, there were people that would come down and they would steal the grain. Not necessarily like coming in and killing. There's not a whole lot of evidence of that. But there is evidence of, well, okay, so the new stuff actually would be evidence of that. So that is new. So there is evidence of coming in and killing. There is evidence of violence as they're coming in and they're taking over. So now we get these cities. The armies have some validity to them, right? But the control and the stratification that comes along with them does not. This becomes the other city is trying to steal from you afterwards. And after it is the other city is trying to steal from you, because we're all in cities, nobody's in the hills anymore. Or though we still have, that barbarian thought process. That's when we start getting the words barbarian, right? As we're talking about the Germanic people. And so after we go from cities, we never get rid of the other one. We add to this again, and we add to this as religion. When we get to an advent of monotheism being a state religion outside of Judaism, right? Even in early monotheism, like Akhenaten in Egypt or Kemet is a monotheistic ruler. And so he makes monotheism a state religion then. And this is like 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago. I can't remember Akhenaten. Maybe it's 4,000 years ago. But even in this space, we see that it's not taking everybody else as bad because of the singular deity. When we get to Judaic people take it as we're chosen, and they are. They're God's chosen. They're the chosen of their God. Their God was a pantheon. There was a pantheon of deities, and their God chose them. He said, "I will be your God, and I will protect you." Okay, and then he was taken from them and appropriated from them. And when he was taken and appropriated as a state religion, is when we start to see this. We got to kill those other people because they don't believe the same way we do. This really doubles down when we hit Turtle Island in 1492. When we see Europeans getting here in 1492, we see that there is a double down of the need to justify. The doctrine of discovery comes out from the Catholic Church that states that any land that's not claimed by the Catholic Church or by members of the Catholic Church is considered unceded land or unclaimed land. And so people can take it, even if there are other people on it. This comes out slightly before Turtle Island, actually. And it has to do with, I believe, the East and Africa at this time. Africa is predominantly Islamic at this time, or belonging to an old pantheon, being animistic, or Christian. The earliest Christian church is actually in Africa and Ethiopia. Okay. And we see that they decide that it comes into color and that color has something to do with it. And when they decide that, we see the start of the word race, and we see the start of the idea that different races and they couch it in biblical terms. So they couch people from Africa as being the children of Ham, who is the son of Cain, who was outcast by God. And the mark of Cain was put upon Ham, and the mark of Cain is dark skin. And this is how Christianity classifies dark skin. There is nobody in here, so I don't have the need to keep these off. And so when they decide that dark skin is the mark of Cain, they're able to take that as the racial, right? This is the mark of Cain, and therefore you're less in God's eyes. And because you're less in God's eyes, it is okay for us to harm you, right? You were marked so that the children of God could, because so Europeans are going as Christians, and I identify as neither Christian or European. So please understand that. Well, I mean, I have European blood. I identify as neither Christian or, but the idea is at this point that if I am God's chosen because I am the son of the children that Adam and Eve have after Cain and Abel, and that Cain was cast out for his action, and that the mark of Cain, the children of the descendants of Ham, has to do with dark skin, then God cast you out. And if God casts you out, it's okay for me to harm you. I'm bringing you back into God's fold, right? You were meant to be my servants anyways. And this is how religion justifies race and racism as a way to cause harm. And we don't really see a lot of this happening again until after we get to Turtle Island and after we get this idea that this is okay, right? Because again, there's a Christian church in Ethiopia. It is our first Christian church, right? It is the earliest Christian church. And again, there is Islam predominant throughout Africa at this time. Islam has been predominant throughout Africa since pretty early on in the Islamic time period. Islam comes onto the field in 600. And since pretty early on, it has been predominant throughout Africa. And so we see that taking this into the next step as they start to find science, right? And then you get the discovery of Neanderthal and the start of evolution, I wish, right? The start of evolution theory, right? The idea of evolution. The idea of evolution in itself is not problematic. It makes sense. And really, the idea that we're just another animal really is cool, right? Like, not putting ourselves above everything would kind of be better. We're a bit egotistical as a species. We're pretty sanctimonious and egotistical as a species, right? We think that we are the top dog, right? Um, and so not thinking that we're the top dog and we're here to, destroy everything else might, be a little bit better. But as we see Neanderthal coming into play and as we see evolution becoming understood. When we see our first Neanderthal, we do not think of this as another species. And the reason that we don't think of this as another species is because we truly believe that we are only 6,000 years old. Evolution theory, hold on a second. I think a cat just did something I don't want them to do. I think I'm safe. Evolution, sorry, YouTube. Evolution doesn't really start, the idea of it doesn't really start until the mid 1800s, right? And evolution theory hadn't really started until after we had found our first Neanderthal. Oh, is that what it was? Oh, I see. Haven made me a picture of hell for Christmas. This is my hell, made by my Haven. My hell fell. Hell fell. So apparently she needed to come on camera and say hi. Deities. So As uh, as they're developing the theory of evolution, after finding Neanderthal, they finally decide that Neanderthal is primitive man, and they decide that he's our precursor. Hi, Riley. And in deciding that he's our precursor, they decide that he is being our precursor. He's primitive, and anybody that they can associate as having traits like him must be primitive as well. And therefore, we can show within science at this point, we believe that um, traits that seem close to Neanderthal morphologically mean that somebody is primitive, right? And so, because we can no longer decide that this is the fact that you're not God's chosen, even though Christianity is not God's chosen, right? Because uh, Western thought, because Christianity, because anthropology, science, European science, I mean, there's so many different ways to phrase it, because it cannot see at this time or say anymore that you are the cast out, God cast you out. It now has to find another way to decide that certain groups of people are less than, right? And therefore they can dehumanize them. Uh, and again, and I say this frequently, this is justification for atrocity. This is them trying to double down on having a way to justify atrocity. The doctrine of discovery was a justification for atrocity. Manifest destiny was a justification for atrocity. The idea that anybody of dark skin is marked by being the child of Cain is justification for atrocity. If you've been marked by Cain, by being the child of Cain, God has marked you, then it's okay to destroy you because God doesn't care, right? Because God has already cast you out. And so in this need to double down on their own idea of being superior, because if they can't double down on being superior, what have they done? Right? If you can't find a way to double down on being superior, what have you done if you've used this superiority complex to attempt to eradicate groups of people for 300 years? If you've used it to steal, to do all the things that you claim are wrong, that you've okayed because you've decided that God marked them for this to happen to. If God didn't mark them, then how can you justify this? How can you justify this to your children? How can you justify this to yourself? You have to have another way to justify this. And so this is where Europeans create the theory of race, as we're creating the theory of evolution, and decide that it's a part of evolution and that certain races exist and that those races are evolutionarily inferior to us, those who look like this, right? So when we see this, we see that the tools that they're using at this time are not very accurate tools, obviously, right? Because they were able to create this. And they decided that by creating this, in using these tools to create this idea to use as confirmation bias, they are able to call it science without it having any accuracy. And therefore, they're able to make it not just God's law, but absolute truth, right? In the eyes of everybody. They can say this is absolutely truthful because, right? Um, and this is where we see that early science, especially within the field that I am in, is extremely problematic. Extremely problematic. It is not about it doesn't ever once disengage from self-interest, I think is the best way to say it. Early archaeology and anthropology Early science never disengages from self interest. It never takes that step above self interest approach, right? I'm pushing them back till 10 a.m. On the AM lives just because I think 8 a.m. is still pretty early for a lot of people over in Europe. And I was trying to catch the European excuse me, content or continent, contingent people over in Europe. I was trying to be able to have people, in every area. And so I'm pushing the AM ones back to 10 a.m. I have not put that up on the website yet. I will put it out on both. Uh, Good morning, Allison. So I can make sure that it everybody understand or everybody knows. I'm sorry. I'm hoping that if I can push them back like this, that actually I'm maybe able to go longer, that it's a little bit later in my morning. So I've been able to kind of put my shit together. Um, yeah, they call it science and then codify it in law. And they call it science and they've decided it's a theory, right? Which, again, theory is something that is proven for now. You got to keep testing it and keep testing it and keep testing it. That's why it's called science and that's why it's a theory, right? Every theory, even the relativity theory of relativity and theory of gravity and all of those things are constantly being uh changed. But there's a point into that too, because they call it science and then codify it into law is the comment, which is absolutely true. They call it theory and then codify it into law too, right? They call it see scientifically we were supposed to understand theory as something that can be changed. It's not a definitive. It is a theory for now. It is a fact for now, right? Facts and I'm often asked what I believe, and what I believe changes, right? Because to me it is facts for now. Everything is a fact for now. This is all just for now. Tomorrow it could be a completely different thing. Tomorrow's truth is completely different from today's truth, right? And because tomorrow's truth is completely different from today's truth, then we have to understand that nothing, not even what we codify as law today, like the law of gravity, right? So the law of gravity, we say can't be changed because it's a law, it's nature's law, right? Except for the fact that we believe this is our theory, the theory of gravity, that this happens because of a dichotomy between the Earth and the core of the Earth and the other beings out in the sky. And I don't understand all the ins and outs. It's not really my area, right? Um, but we believe that it happens because of the interchange of a couple of different planetary poles, right? Like our own and other planets. And so we know that this theory can change if we discover different ways to understand why gravity is happening, right? But we still believe that gravity itself is a law, it's a fact, it's always going to be there, it's always going to happen. But the reality is that's not true. Air was always going to be there, and now we know it's not. Water was always going to be there, and now we know it's not. As we change the environment, we will change that. People have been waiting for a polar shift to happen for decades. Like I grew up with a conspiracy theorist who was bound and determined that the polar shift was going to happen, and she moved us all to Northeast Washington because that was a safe zone on the coast, right? Like people have thought the polar shift is going to happen for decades. If the polar shift happens, gravity changes, right? There are different things that can cause the law of gravity to no longer be a law, right? And there are different understandings that can come about that can change how we understand that law as well, right? We might come to a discovery that really it's about the interplay between a part of our not reality, but maybe hypothesis, right? Hypothesis. Haven't gotten a testable way for it, so I can't put it into hypothesis thesis, but still, maybe it's our chakra alignments. And there's cores within every being's body, and the cores within every being's body, including the grass and the air, the leaves and everything else. And the cores within every being's body connects to the earth. And those cores within everything's body actually are what we think of as gravity. And it has nothing to do with the moon. Maybe, right? There's other ideas and possibilities out there. I don't think that's one of them. I don't know. But, like I know that there are, right? So when we look at these things, we call them laws, we call them facts, we decide that this is it for today. We must recognize always this is it for today, right? There are some things that have always been for us, right? This is the way that it has been for this long. But we also need to understand that anything that has always been is only for a certain period of time, anyways. We've always been animistic until 10,000 years ago. We've always been Christian for 200 years, right? Like, way you have to understand that even things that are always are not, right? Nothing is monolithic, and nothing, we change. Everything about us is change. The way we affect the environment, right? Our purpose within the biome that we evolved to fulfill is to change, to help the change of other things, to guide them in growth, to tend them, right? So, if that's the case, we have to understand that change should happen. Change is supposed to happen. And anytime you go, this is what we've always, that's something you have to change. Anytime you think, why do we do this? We've always done this. Change it. If we've always done it, change it. It's time. If we've hit a pattern where we think we've always done this, it's time to change it. Not only is that evidenced within ourselves and within change and within our body, but that is evidenced within the globe around us. We've hit a space where we're kind of fucking it up. We really, really, really need to change some of this shit so that we can do better for our planet, right? So, race is the last, not even the last. Race is the one we know the most of othering, and the one that we've been able to codify into law, basically, right? The one that we've been able to, though some of the other ones we are codifying into law, and we have been codifying into law, right? But race is the one that we've been holding pretty tight to and have based a lot of our shit on for quite some time. Everything about the United States and Canada and Mexico is built within race theory and built within the idea of race. All the governmental, unless we're talking about specific governmentals within specific South American states that have been able to return that I'm not sure of. Pretty much anything that you're seeing down there is government structured based on European governmental structure, based on religion and based on race, right? Doctrine of discovery, right? So everything within the Turtle Islands is all based on race, all the governmental structures. All based on this idea that I can look at your skin and tell you who you are. I have to tell you that I have this very hard issue with that. As you can see, people can tell me what I am a lot, right? Especially as I have moved within communities that don't look like me, but that my ancestors looked like, right? And I find the idea that we can tell a person who they are based on our perception is really fucked up, right? Who are you? Why are you that sanctimonious and egotistical? Why do you think your opinion should matter to me about me? Unless I've asked you, why do you think your opinion of me should matter to me? Right? This is a societal structure. Of course, this is something that we have used to conform people. This is something that we have used for government and state to maintain control for an extended period of time. This is all stuff that is really innately a part of us now, right? But it's not innately a part of us. It's a lesson that we're taught, right? We think of it as innate. So race becomes this method of othering Uh, it is all about control. And about 10 years ago, they started doing what they call the Human Genome Project. And what this does is it takes all DNA that they have and tries to access more. It takes DNA from ancient DNA samples. It takes DNA from modern populations. It takes DNA from any population that they can get a hold of, including populations that are still pretty primary populations. And when it puts these all together, it realizes something. And what it realizes is that what we have been talking about race as the idea that your skin color uh, indicates what your intelligence level is, what your pain level is, where you are on our scale of evolution, we think, really. I mean, that's where we really base it down on, right? We don't say it that way, but that's really what it says, right? And this picture behind me is that perfect thought, or perfect example of that thought, right? It is that show of that idea that primitive equals dark skin, right? Less evolved on the scale of evolution equals dark skin, right? Um, and so we should really call it what it is, right? Instead of calling it all the different things, it is about thinking that um, you are less evolved if your skin is darker. And in being less evolved, if your skin is darker, it means that you feel pain less because animals don't feel pain the way humans do. It was 2003 when they decided babies could feel pain before 6 months old. Um, it's just idiotic to me. But anyways, the idea that animals don't feel pain, and so people who are less on the evolutionary ladder in our white superiority mind frame must absolutely not feel pain. And the idea that intelligence is less, and the idea that uh, you're better able to control, right? This is what chattel slavery does. It literally turns human beings into animals. And that is the difference between slavery, pre chattel slavery, and slavery, post chattel slavery, and chattel slavery. Chattel itself means animals. Chattel is your farm animals. It's exactly what the word means. It's exactly what they call it, right? Or what that word comes from. That's the etymology of that word, and that's why they use that word. So, using their calipers, using their frame of reference of skin color, which is paint on parchment. Uh, Same with eye color, usually done in glass. We Sami Blood, SAMIBLOD, is on Amazon, and it's a or maybe Netflix, and it's a really good movie about residential schools in Sweden, because the Swedish did residential schools for their Sami people as well, right? And so it goes into this, and it takes a really good look at it. Uh, and that measurement of eye and hair and skin, even in the very Nordic countries, and the use of that measurement to deem people from certain races within those countries, even if they're as light as I am, right? So when we look at this, we see where the start of this is not scientific at all. The start of the theory of race is not based on real science, it's based on pseudoscience. When they gather the Human Genome Project, we are looking at real science. We are looking at DNA. We are looking at measurements that have value on a scale of evidence, like a weight, right? Measuring my skull doesn't mean jack shit. It's surface. We don't read a book by its cover, but we read a human being by their skin, right? So when we're looking at this, the Human Genome Project taking this from everywhere and from pre-colonized finds as well, because we're taking it from ancient anthropology or ancient DNA as well. What they're seeing is that the genetics, the genetic differences are greater within populations, vaster within a population than they are between populations. Okay. Now, if you think about this, this makes logical sense to everyone. We know what happens when a genetic pool becomes too narrow. This is inbreeding. This is why we think the Neanderthals didn't last as a whole species. This is what happened to the Habsburgs and why they all went insane and have that weird ass jaw and couldn't eat. This is what happened to many different groups within the pharaonic Egyptian line, right? Pretty much every dynasty was pretty inbred, right? Um, and so we see that this genetic narrowing, uh, diversity narrowing, would create populations that are inbred, right? Look at the Amish population. And I'm not saying that the Amish population is inbred. I do not believe that they are that inbred. I do know that there are certain things that are popping out because of the fact that there are only a few families, right? Um, but I mean, I think like they're really particular about making sure that they have like they'll marry outside into a different community. But they're doing that because of that search for genetic diversity, right? And because the reason that they don't have genetic diversity within that population is because they've only got a couple of families. And narrow genetic diversity is not a positive. So when you look at healthy, thriving populations, you see that you have to have an abundance of genetic diversity there. You have to have a bunch of different genes. Now, this doesn't mean you have to have 5,000 different family lines or 3,000 different mitochondrial DNAs, right? That's not what that means. What it means is that I believe we have 25,000 genes. I believe I heard that somewhere. Um, I heard it along the lines that we're actually a species that doesn't have a lot of genetic diversity in our species. We're actually pretty narrowly genetic diverse compared to other animals. And I heard it, I think, in one of the videos I have up of Dr. Chung. Chang, not Chung, sorry. It went weird in my mind and I was picturing a U for some reason, and that's incorrect. Chang, Dr. Chang. So when I was looking at that, when we look at that, if there's 25,000 genes within us, to not get so genetically narrow, a population needs to have a vast majority of those genes, right? And so where we see people migrating out, they're going to take less genes with them. So, like Iceland has less genetic diversity, right? This is a later settlement. It's a settlement by a few families, right? There's less genetic diversity within Iceland. Certain spaces that that happens with are going to show a little bit less genetic diversity. Groups that have been isolated for generations as a small group, not like the entirety of the Turtle Islands, but like maybe, like the Singalese probably have less genetic diversity within them, right? When we look at this, what we see is that there is more genetic diversity within primary populations than between primary populations, meaning that I have more genetic. I'm not a good example. On standard, if you are in the Sudan, you have more genetic diversity from your next door neighbor than you have genetic diversity from somebody in Sweden. I often use small numbers to explain this because it's easiest. If the whole genome of the human species is 100 genes, right? Uh, and everybody gets 25 of those 100 genes. And it's a random 25, right? It comes from your family line, it comes from different places. Everybody gets 25 of those genes. Um, I am going to have genes 1 through 25, and my next door neighbor is going to have genes 75 through 100, right? Whereas somebody in Sweden has genes 1 through 25, and somebody in Asia has genes 75 to 100. It is more genetically close to my next door neighbor than my next door neighbor is to me, right? So when we're looking at this, what it tells us is where the first population is. The one population that has all 25,000 genomes, or genes, right? Uh, Alleles within the population, which is the Khoisan people, Khoi space SAN. And they have the most genetic diversity within their population. They have all the genes that we know of within the human genome. Um, and we see this when we do the Human Genome Project and we get genes from across the globe. And we understand this within the Khoisan population as this being the original population. That's why they have all the genes. We see that as you get to certain spaces, there is a narrowing of how many genes that a certain group might have. But that they still have all the genes at the same time. And what I mean by this is of those 25,000 genes, probably 100 are intelligent genes, right? Every gene itself has a bunch of different genes or alleles within it. We say gene, but it typically means that there's like several genes within the gene, and the arrangement of those genes is what tells us what it means, right? The different way that it stacks together, what we call alleles within it, and the way those alleles and I may be not doing this the best because I'm not the best at this. This is not my field of expertise. Fisciograph is great at this. And she is here. They are here on TikTok. I follow them. But the alleles, White Star Mama is also really good at genes. The alleles, the way the alleles stack together, the words that they form, right? The way that they read tells us what the gene that you have is, right? So if we have 100 genes for intelligence, everybody is going to get genes for intelligence. Every group of people has genes for intelligence, and they have the uh, the genes that will go high and the genes that will go low on the genes from intelligence. What they Oh, I see. Thought it was requesting. Oh my god. So what they have, those genes for intelligence, they still have the genes for intelligence. They just might not have. So if genes for intelligence, say, are, let's drop that down. Say there's 25 genes for intelligence, right? And each gene for intelligence has 5 alleles within it, right? But it's the alleles within those genes that dictate the level of intelligence, not which of the 25 genes that you get. Okay. So say that if we have 25 genes and every population and a population only gets 10 genes based on intelligence, right? 10 genes that affect intelligence, right? Instead of all 25 genes that affect intelligence, they're still going to have the allele ability within those 10 genes to stack up to both have extremely high, what we call IQs, and extremely low IQs. Okay. Um, it is not the gene itself, like gene 1 through 25. 1 says you're lacking intelligence, and 25 says you have intelligence, right? That's not what it says. All 1 through 25s say both. Each 1 through 25 states great intelligence, not so great intelligence, right? It is the way that the letters of alleles within each of those genes stack that states it. So no group is going without the possibility of high intelligence or without the possibility of low intelligence. No group is going without the impossibility of sports acumen or hunting acumen, right? Because that's really what sports acumen is, right? That ability to go out and be very athletic. Athletic is really correlated to uh, long range hunting, right? Having to run something down, right? I would say, but again, those narrowings of genetic diversity are not going to affect intelligence. They're not going to affect um, they're not going to affect the way somebody is able to work, right? They're not going to affect somebody's capabilities so much until we get to inbreeding, right? Because that inbreeding grabs you. I don't know about intelligence based on a Western thought scale. I don't know enough. Uh, I don't even understand their IQ tests. Like, I've been told I should take it for for a dyslexic IQ test, which might be possible, but my intelligence doesn't work along that rate. Like, I just can't. I don't work my intelligence in that rate. I can't function it within that. So I don't know Western thought intelligence. I've been told several times I have really high IQ, but I'm like, I've never taken a test that said that. So thanks, but okay. Right. Like, um, uh, I mean, I know it's above 100, but I don't know, and that's with me not understanding. The tests are confusing. The tests really confuse me. Anyways, so I don't know enough about that. Yeah. Okay. Somebody else does though. That's what I love having about my or about having my comments on. There's almost always somebody else. Um, and that's probably true, Prudy. So with that, we see that all the populations have all the abilities for all of the abilities, right? They have the ability to range the abilities. Um, what we see in population differences really has to do with adaptation to space. It doesn't have to do with evolutionary space, right? Adaptation isn't about evolving, it's about adapting. Um, it becomes evolution uh, when it's a species whole that's doing it, or when adaptations have made a separate species, which in Homo sapien they have not. So, um, when we look at that, we have to understand that the adaptations that you see that are the physical morphological adaptations that allow human species or Homo sapien to adapt to different areas, which is what gives us our ability to go global, unlike any other species can, right? And our ability to adapt the area to us really gives us that too. Um, but it is that ability to adapt and that ability to morph that is our species greatness. It is not the individual adaptations, right? Because we have to understand that a species, hold on a second, let me make sure I frame these words right. That a species advantage must work for the whole of the species in every space that the species inhabits, which means dark skin is a species advantage. It works for the whole of the species in every space that the species inhabits. You can get iron from other spaces, or not iron, vitamin D from other spaces. Sorry. Um, but white skin is not a species advantage because you cannot cover it up enough in the high sun contents, right? Uh, so dark skin being a species advantage, light skin being an adaptation from that species advantage to provide adaptation species or adaptive advantage in a specific area. Okay. If you take it and remove it from that area, it doesn't work. So it is not a species advantage, it is an adaptation. Okay. And this is the same thing with everything else. Okay. Uh, we have studies recently that show us that we get 4C hair because it creates a lattice work on top of the head in a high sun area. And it also creates like a block, right? Because it creates this almost solid block here in a way that 1A hair does not, right? The scalp is no longer exposed at all. And then it creates a lattice work for airflow, which cools the brain, right? But if you take that out of Africa or Australia and you put that up in uh, Iceland, which Scandinavian people do have 4C hair actually relatively regularly. I've known several Scandinavian people with 4C hair in my lifetime that didn't have any African ancestry within the last, 100 generations, um, or at least through their family documentation, right? So it doesn't work as well, right? Because now you have that airflow that's freezing your scalp, right? So now you have to adapt to hair that's going to not get that airflow freezing your scalp all day long, right? Blue is a mutation of brown due to conditions of living. So we believe that lighter eyes are coming from Neanderthal genetics, but it is something that we would have had as a recessive gene within us. So, and it is something that we see even in African populations that do not have Neanderthal, because there's only two African populations that don't have Neanderthal DNA, and even in those populations, we do see blue eyes occasionally. Um, this is a recessive gene. Uh, and what it is it's a low light gene. It's an adaptation for living in low light, right? Um, if you and you know this one, I'm sure, because I know that you have lighter eyes, right? Um, if you take lighter eyes out into a high sun area, I have gray eyes. And first, I'm going to explain recessive genes to you. Recessive genes are genes that uh, so each genetic or gene, an allele has a dominant and a recessive. And it can have one dominant and several recessives. And if you have eyes, is a great way to explain this. If you have a brown eyed parent, brown eyes being the dominant gene, and a blue eyed parent, blue eyes being the recessive gene, then you're going to have a brown eyed child. But that brown eyed child will carry the recessive gene of the blue eyes, right? Now, if you have a brown eyed parent and a blue eyed parent, and both of those parents have gray eyes in their family tree, that gray eye, when the recessive gene on one side meets the recessive gene on the other side, that recessive gene becomes the dominant gene. This is how we get blue eyes. Two recessive genes in brown eyed people meet. And when those recessive genes in brown eyed people meet, blue eyes becomes predominant. And then blue eyes and blue eyes and blue eyes and blue eyes, right? Um, then it becomes a recessive gene. So if you have a brown eyed mother, which I do, and a blue-eyed father, which I do, then you can have blue eyes or brown eyes. My mother has both blue and brown eyes in her family tree. If you go back two generations, there's also an abundance of gray. And the same thing, if you look at my father's family tree after I found my blood father, if you go back two generations, you see that there are gray eyes everywhere. So the recessive gray eye on my mom met the recessive gray eye on my dad and created a dominant gene within me. I have one child that's gray eyed, one child that's golden eyed, which is green and gold and light brown, like a yellow. And I have one child that is it's really hard sometimes with gray eyes because it's changeable. Sometimes somebody can look like they're going to be blue-eyed for a long time, and then they turn into gray-eyed because you're just not seeing the shift of the colors because that's what gray is. But I think that my middle child will probably end up being grayed. Currently, I think he's blue eyes. But his brother has gray eyes. My youngest has gray eyes. Um, and their father has blue eyes. So we see that this is how we get blue eyes becoming a dominant gene. Is that when Neanderthals who had lighter eyes met with Homo sapiens who had the recessive gene for lighter eyes, and they mixed, it became a stronger recessive gene. It's not an automatic, it's going to take a few generations for it to really start coming about. And so what we see about blue eyes being the low light adaptation and light eyes being a low light adaptation. Um, what it is it allows more light in. Okay. Think of it as the same thing as skin, right? The melanin content in skin. It's the same thing, right? Um, when you have higher melanin content, it blocks UV rays better, right? When you have a higher melanin content in your eyes, that's basically what the pigment is, right? When you have that higher content in your eyes, it blocks the sun coming in better. When you have a lower content of it, you get the lighter color eyes. That's less melanin, and I'm not sure if melanin is the exact like thing itself. It might not be melanin. It might be called something else, but it's basically the same kind of thing, right? But I do believe it is melanin because it's also affected by albinoism, and albinoism is an absolute absence of melanin. Um, and so you see that absolute absence of melanin also affects the eyes, and the eyes will become pink or purple. But so yeah, it is melanin then. Okay, so you see that the less melanin in the eye iris allows more light in. And so having less melanin is a low light adaptation because it allows you to pick up on more light in the surrounding environment. Whereas a higher melanin, thank you, Jedi, as a higher melanin is going to block out more light in a high light environment, which is why we believe that as Homo sapiens that we develop with foresty hair and brown eyes and dark skin and tall and lean because that dissipates the heat. But uh, this is also why we see that humans going into Homo sapiens going into West Asia or Asia actually, thank you, Allison. And Asia actually get lighter eyes before they get lighter skin. We see that up until, you know, I think that the number is 6,000 years ago is when they start to see light skin being half of the population, roughly, or start to see it becoming more predominant in the population. I know that by 2,000 years ago, we're looking at like 70 to 80% of the population. And by 1,000 years ago, even in Scandinavia, we're still seeing 10% of the population is dark. Okay. Egil is dark from the sagas. And he is not the only person described as being dark in the sagas. And we see that this adaptation comes through much later, right? That adaptation of skin color. But we also see in none of this that genetics do not change intelligence, that they don't change physical capability, right? Uh, family lines and genetic mutations that you might get from your family line will affect things. We see this in things like a higher percentage of heart problems in certain demographics, right? It is not because of the melanin content in their skin that they have a higher percentage of heart problems. It's because you're seeing a higher percentage of people coming from a direct family line, right? You're seeing a lot of the same family lines that have brought this genetics over, right? So if you see that, and we know that the transatlantic slave trade happens all along the west coast of Africa, but it goes into the middle of Africa as well, right? Uh, we also understand, though, that you're looking at specific nations in West Africa and in Central Africa, specific nations that are being affected by this. And within specific nations, you're seeing specific family lines, right? So you're seeing a lot of people coming over with similar mitochondrial DNA lines, similar genetic lines. Um, and so if you're seeing that there's a correlation that many people who are descendant of the slave trade here in the United States carry a same gene, it doesn't mean that Black people are more susceptible to heart disease. It means that this family line is more susceptible to heart disease, right? It means that this ancestor that lived 6,000 years ago was susceptible to heart disease, and the genetics that they translated across the entirety of West Africa, not that it's all of West Africa, but like the lines that they translate down, right? Light skin becomes so dominant in Eurasia over time. And really, that's what it is. It takes 100 generations for an adaptation to happen. For Homo sapiens, they consider that 2,500 years, 25 years per generation, modern Homo sapiens. So it takes, in taking 100 generations, 2,500 years, we're looking at pretty much 10,000 years ago, everybody's pretty dark. And then at, 7.5 thousand years ago, you start to see more of the population being light. 5,000 years ago, you start to see more of the population being light. 2.5 thousand years ago, you start to see more of the population being light, right? So because what you're seeing is every 100 generations, right? Of course, like by 50 generations, you're probably going to see some difference, but We would see some difference. They are not going to see the difference. You don't see the differences in your great grandchild from you. If you are if I'm a Heidelbergensis and my great grandchild or even my grandchild is a Neanderthal to modern humans, yay. But I'm just grandma and that's just my grandbaby, right? You're not going to see the difference if you're living in it. But somebody looking from the past might see the difference. It is the environment that triggers and what it is the environment triggers. So what I understand of it is that as I am carrying a child, the environment outside of me triggers different genetic adaptations within the child. Um, and so if I am and this does not happen anymore because we've adapted our adaptations to the point that we're not subject to environmental changes when it comes to things like we have been in the past. As air and water quality changes, we will be again, and this will affect changes. But while I'm carrying my child, the amount of sun that I'm getting will dictate whether or not they lessen the melanin content or raise the melanin content in their skin. Actually, this was another recent study I saw that I thought was really fantastic. Um, and so I might say I am in North Africa, and I'm okay because also at this time we do have this high level, this layer that develops over our skin that they've discovered that um, is a mixture of like the oils of our skin and dead skin that creates this kind of like sunblock along our skin. But and say 6, 7,000 years ago, right? I can do this in North Africa. I have enough skin covering of my skin, right? It's not going to be easy, but I have some understanding, right? So, but because I am in North Africa and there is a lot of sun, my child sensing that the genetic makeup of me sensing that is going to give my child slightly darker skin so that they can block the melanin content as well. And what this is a combination. So I have the genes for light skin and I have the genes for dark skin in me, right? I have both Neanderthal and Homo sapien dark skin and Neanderthal and Homo sapien light skin when I look at my genetics. This is because I'm violently mixed everywhere. It's everywhere. It's global. It's everything in me, right? There's just a lot of everything in me. So um, I have the ability to my body has those alleles and those genes, right? So if I have the genes for both the dark skin and the light skin within me, it is the alleles on those genes and the way they stack that has given me this, and a severe lack of iron that has given me this. Um, and so the way those alleles form in the child that my body is forming are going to form for better protection for the child as it comes out, right? So this is how we understand the child adapting and how we understand that that adaptation is happening, or at least how I understand it from what I've been reading recently on it. And this thing about the color changing in utero, like our melanin content being affected by the sun that the mother intakes, is it's relatively recent article that I found. Right? Not necessarily. Okay. So here's an important point. We never lived in an ice age area through an ice age. Neanderthals did. Erectus did. Um, Heidelbergensis did. But we don't make it into Europe until after the end of the last ice age. We are in the Levant mixing with Neanderthals, right? But we don't make it into Europe until we start moving into Europe at 50,000 years ago, which is the end of the start of the end of the last ice age. And as the ice recedes, we start moving into space. So we never actually lived through an ice age in an area where we had ice. We've always been in a space of high heat and high sun through an ice age. Um, which parts of this, Elrica? I do have the Neanderthal and the Erectus stuff. I have some of it up. I'm probably not going to put everything I have, but I do have a bunch of stuff up there. I'll probably add more as I get a hair up my hind end on the Widda Ord site. Underneath the bibliographies tab, and there's some articles that you can go ahead and find more articles on some of this stuff. I don't know if it's touching directly on what we're talking about right this minute, or which your point you're talking about that you're looking for information on. But sorry. We will if things continue. I agree with that. 5% is a high percentage of Neanderthal. A lot of us think that the 23andMe or ancestry results that say like I have 95% or 98% more Neanderthal DNA than, or I have more Neanderthal DNA than 98% of society or of humanity, right? That doesn't mean I have 98% Neanderthal DNA. What it means is that I think I have like 4% Neanderthal DNA. I can't remember the number it gave me. It just says I have this percentage more. But in looking at that, it's talking about comparing you to the rest of society. It's not talking about the percentage amount within you, right? About the timeline on Homo sapiens, I do not have anything up on Homo sapiens on that site yet, because we haven't been discussing Homo sapiens a whole lot. I'll see if I can put something up by the end of the day. I think I have a couple of things bookmarked. I just have to find them. But I would also go and Google evolution of skin color. Skin adaptation in sapiens. Might be a couple of good places to start. But I think I have a couple articles on it. And I'll see if I can tease them out of thousands of bookmarks I have. That's the problem with trying to put all these things up, is I literally have like thousands of bookmarks I'm going through, and there's just like so much. And then like I have to kind of like look at every article and go, okay, so because so many articles will have something in them today, something in them that is going to either change tomorrow or is already like disproven, right? Like I'll look at articles and I'm like, okay, but we already know that that doesn't work. Like this other article over here states this. And so I have to look through every article, and then I get like, well, I don't know if I want to put that one up because there's some good points, but I don't know if everybody will understand there's also some bad points, right? Yeah, I can put a couple in Discord. I've got to find them. It'll be a hot second because I usually get off and I vegetate and do nothing for a hot minute. So let me find them. But I don't think I think my partner's gone tonight, so they're going over to their brother's. So I'm totally open tonight, so I can probably get them up tonight. Why are they always trying to change our feet? I don't know. 218 variants. I'm not sure what the 218 variants is. This is why DNA is so hard for me, and why so I do a lot of my own genealogy. I've done all of my own genealogy because I'm really big, and I always have been on Ancestry, but I also am really big on making sure that I know for myself so that I'm not appropriating or saying things that aren't true. And so I've done a lot of my own. Hold on. Sorry, can you guys all hear me? I got a phone call in, and when I get a phone call in, it will do that. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Are they doing studies on flat-footed in First Nations people? Awesome, thank you. I don't worry so much about YouTube. I know YouTube doesn't like because YouTube's on my computer. It's not on my phone. And so it's a little bit easier in YouTube. I know that audio doesn't go out over there, but I know like I have to repause and restart the live if it goes off. Yep. I literally for me, they have these things that you can do where it'll put it in and it'll match it to all the like grave sites, or it'll match it to like all the matches that you have. And I think it's like GD match. Maybe it's all your DNA portal. One of them will like pull up this map that has a blue dot everywhere you have a genetic match or everywhere you have a grave genetic match, right? And I pull that up, and the entire northern latitude of the globe is a swath of blue. Like Turtle Island, Europe, North Asia is a swath of blue. Southern Turtle Island has like this big blue chunk in the middle of it, and Africa has like a chunk here and a chunk here and a chunk here. Um, and there's even like a couple of dots, like just a couple of dots down in Australia. And like but it's literally like everywhere across the globe. It's just lit up in blue. And I'm like, holy shit. It's just, and for me, I've known of most of them most of my life. But for me, it just relates that I'm related to everybody. Like you're all my cousins. We're all cousins. Every one of you. Every one of you. We're all family, right? That's why, we shouldn't be hurting each other because we're all family. You're all my cousins. Why the fuck are you beating the shit out of each other? You should be hurting each other. We should be loving each other. Um, I'm calling a family reunion. I'm calling a family reunion. We need a family meeting. We need to stop beating the shit out of each other. I call family meeting. How did Homo sapiens get genes for blue eyes? So, first of all of those genes come to us from Homo erectus. Homo erectus had the genetic variation for this. They gave this to Neanderthal. They gave this genetic variation to Homo sapiens. We absolutely see blue eyes pop up in people's who from Africa who don't have any outside DNA. So they have that recessive gene there. And sometimes, if two parents with the recessive gene have a child, that recessive gene will pop out. I've known a couple people in my life who were like dark, dark, dark chocolate, dark, right? With beautiful, bright, sparkling blue eyes naturally, right? Um, so you can absolutely have this happen. Um, but we also see that we were in the Levant we get into the Levant. We think that the first time we made it into the Levant is probably about 200,000 years ago. 285,000 years ago is when we think we first bred with Neanderthals and replaced their Y DNA with our Y DNA. And this would have happened in the Levant area. Neanderthals are a species that speciates in Europe from the same species that we speciate from. So they're our first cousins, right? Like auntie had them and mama had us, right? And so we see that they have the same blue eye gene that we get from Homo erectus. They get from Homo erectus. Heidelbergensis is a child of erectus, right? And Heidelbergensis is the parent of both us and Homo Neanderthal, right? And so we see that Neanderthal gets that gene more predominantly because they're in that low light area. So when they meet with us, they kind of introduce that recessive gene in us to the recessive gene or dominant gene in them and start to bring it to the forefront. And in this starting to bring it to the forefront, it still takes time, right? And it still takes that movement into that area, just like it takes that movement into the area to get light skin to really come forefront as well. And light skin gene actually goes back 900,000 years, right? They've recently done articles on that. And so we see that it is just the adaption that takes over first. It's the one we need the most, so it comes quicker, right? We don't need the light skin as much as we need the light eyes. We need to see our environment much more, right? It is absolutely necessary for you to see your environment. Light skin, the current things that we think that light skin does for us. There is some recent studies that show that it might retain heat better. Um, and we believe that it provides access to vitamin D in a low light area. These are the things that we believe light skin provides. This is it, right? Um, we can get vitamin D from other things, and it would take a minute for the heat adaptation to be that primary need, right? We'd have to move up into the higher northern climates by that, to get that point, right? And we absolutely see that it is the higher northern climates that actually have the lighter skin, right? Caucasian is actually the Levant area, Caucasus Mountains down in the Levant and across North Africa. That's Caucasian. Light skin, white, Nordic, or light like Arctic. And it is Arctic, right? We see it across the Arctic. We see that in Asia, light skin happens in the Arctic regions. We see that in Turtle Island, light skin naturally happens within the Arctic regions. This is an Arctic adaptation, right? Um, Rude, you might want to actually stick around because you're going to like what I have to say if you stay and listen, because I'm actually stating that light skin is not the genetic advantage, that dark skin is the genetic advantage. Um, we're debunking race in here. We're debunking the idea of race in here. So you might want to stick around. You might actually like what you're hearing. But we see that comes in much later than we like to think, A. And again, we see that light skin is not the species advantage. For it to be a species advantage, it has to work everywhere for the species. It is species, it has to work everywhere the species is. If it's not working where the species is, then it's not a species advantage, it's an adaptation, right? Well, so recently they've discovered that light skin actually goes back to 900,000 years old. It's something that we get from Homo erectus, and Homo erectus gave it to Neanderthal and to us. But it becomes a dominant gene well after we meet with Neanderthal. And actually, we understand that light skin does not really come about as a population majority in specific areas, and it's only in specific areas until a couple of thousand years ago. We're seeing that it's really not. I would say that white people are a global minority. Um, Not a minority in the marginalized minority type, right? They're definitely not marginalized in any way, shape, or form. And that definitely does not give them the, oh my God, we're a minority, now treat us better. Uh, but I would definitely say that globally, yes, right? Globally, yes. Light skin, again, light skin is not an advantage. It's an it's adaptation, but it's not a species advantage. And because it's not a species advantage, and it's only an adaptation for specific areas of the globe that we didn't make it into until roughly 10,000 years ago. Which is another reason that it's so recent, right? Because we don't really make it into. Okay, so we've recently pushed back our first finds in Britain to 14,000 years ago of Homo sapiens. Anything prior to that is not Homo sapien, it's Neanderthal or Heidelbergensis. Um, and this is all after the ice recedes from England, because Britain doesn't leave the ice. It starts leaving the ice at 27,000 years ago. Northern Britain is not out from underneath the ice until 8,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago. Ireland is 8,000 years ago, right? Um, Sweden, Scandinavia is 7,000 years ago, right? So what we see is that we're not needing this adaptation until recently, right? This is not an adaptation we need until recently because we're not in a space that we need it. And again, it takes 100 generations, 2,500 years for an adaptation to show, to really take effect, right? Or to happen. What we have right now is 7,000 years of 100 generations getting lighter, and the next 100 generation getting lighter, and the next 100 generation getting lighter till you get almost translucent in extreme northern environments. Though I do want to point out that the Sami people are more of an olive undertone, right? The Sami people, so Scandinavia was settled by two specific groups through genetics or through DNA understanding. One is light skinned and dark eyed, and that is the Sami. The other is dark skin and light eyed, and that is the present day Scandinavians, um, who are extremely light now, where Sami people are not. Sami people, if you look at the majority of Sami people, they're actually a little bit more olive than the than white, right? Like more my tone, maybe a little bit darker than the translucent white, right? Um, and so we're seeing that the Sami actually don't get lighter. Like this is how they start in Scandinavia. The Sami are a Finno-Ugric people, language root, and they're coming up from East Asia, from the Siberian part, right, and coming up and over. Whereas, so as we're leaving the Levant, we're coming out, and the ice is here across the top of the Mediterranean. And so first we go east because we can't go west. And then as the ice recedes, we start coming up, curving over the top of the Mediterranean. And as it recedes, we start moving into these populations. So we come up and we go east first, but as we move back, we have certain groups that stay going east and going up, and certain groups that move back over as the ice is receding. So the Sami people are coming from one of the groups that moves up first to the west or to the east and then over, a Finno-Ugric base, as opposed to the Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European, and the rest of the groups. And so we're seeing this specific group coming up, but because, and I personally think this is because they are in the Asian area and get to the light point that they need here, and they don't need to get lighter. Whereas by the time they move into those extreme northern climates, they've already got that light enough, right? It doesn't need to get lighter. Whereas the group coming in that's extremely dark skinned, with blue eyes, is coming in and needing to get lighter, and the adaptation just doesn't stop, right? There, it just continues, right? And I'm not saying that Sami people aren't still adaptive, because they're absolutely still adaptive, and that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that I think that they got what they needed and they didn't need to go further when it came to that, right? And I find it interesting that they start out light skin and dark eyed and they stay that, whereas the dark skin and the light eyed get so light comparatively, right? That to me is just really weird. Ancient New England? Do you mean like Turtle Island, the state within the United States? And it's not so much just the colder temps that light skin becomes so dominant. What it is that, um, well, first of all, you don't need the protection, right? The sun isn't there, so you don't need that protection. So that need for that protection kind of fades. And then you get the need for the vitamin D, right? Um, and then you get, if the idea that it is about helping retain heat, then you get that as well. But really, that's a recent study. Up until that, we've really only thought of it as the attempt to get vitamin D better. I do believe that actually they are. I think linguistically we can relate the Sami to Siberia. Though I would have to look and see, and this is why. Um, Groups in Siberia have the X2 mitochondrial DNA, which comes from Turtle Island. It's a backward migration from Turtle Island because X1 is here in Turtle Island. Um, and if the Sami are coming from this Siberian group that has that, it would show up in that. So I'd want to take a look. Um, I personally believe that there's Arctic migration. I believe that Arctic people are using the Arctic to move because, duh, right? Like Arctic people have been using the Arctic to move about for thousands and thousands of years. Why we would think that they're not? Yeah, practically translucent is real. Um, there was a question here. Oh, the Rh negative blood type. Let me explain the very little I know about that. Um, Blood types are taken from the antigens that go around our blood cells. And what ABO is the ABO antigens around the blood cells. There are several different antigens around the blood cells, and each of those antigens gets categorized as a specific blood type. They have several different ways that they type our blood. The most common one is A, B, and O. Uh, there are 49 Rh antigens. If a woman is missing Rh capital D antigen, her second pregnancy of a child that does not, that has that antigen, and it must be the second or later pregnancies. It is not in the first pregnancy with a child that has the positive antigen. Is creates almost like this antibody effect within the mother's body. And the mother's antibodies, these are antigens, right? Antibodies fight that antigen that they see because they don't have it. When you get allergies to bee stings, you have to be exposed to the bee sting first, right? You have to be stung. It's not the first sting that causes the allergy, it's the second sting that causes the allergic reaction. The first sting, or it's not the first thing you see the allergic reaction. It is the second sting you see the allergic reaction. The first sting introduces, and your body goes, "What the fuck is that? No, we don't like that." So the next time it comes around, your body goes, no. Okay. So this is the same with the Rh negative and Rh positive. The only thing it affects is whether or not the mother can carry a child. Okay. And it only affects children after the first, it doesn't affect the first child. And again, it is missing one Rh antigen. We see that the largest populations of Rh negative people are 3 or 4 different populations around the globe, and they're all about 19% are Rh negative. There is no singular population that we see the Rh negative antigen is highest in. And those populations that we see around the globe are in every space. So we're looking at Asian populations, African populations, European populations. Okay. And so it's not looking at a specific heritage, right? It's not looking at a specific ethnicity having a higher percentage. When you're looking at your blood, if you're O negative, it means that in the ABO scale, you're O. You can be A, you can be B, you can be O, you can be AB. The negative means that you're Rh negative for the antigen Rh capital D. If you are B positive, it means that in the ABO, I am B, and in the Rh, I am positive. So when it's O neg, it means that you are Rh negative. When it's O pos, it means that you are Rh positive. And again, it is that singular antigen. It is that singular antigen. And being Rh negative or positive does not change your ABO blood type or any of your other blood types. Well, and so I am curious. I only started learning about RH initially because my last husband's mother was RH negative and he was RH positive. And so she had to take a bunch of medication while she was pregnant, or she would have lost him. But he was her first. And his whole life, he has stated that, or has been told that she stopped taking the medication while she was pregnant with him because she didn't want to have him and she was trying to abort him. Um, but if he was her first, I'm not sure why she would have had to take the medication from what I know now, right? That your first child causes that, right? And that the subsequent children you need to take the shots for, right? Um, so I'm unsure. There's not a lot of truth to most of his stories, anyways, that I've found out after I divorced him. So I'm not positive on any of them. But so that was very curious for me. But that was what I kind of knew about RH beforehand. I went and did some deep dive because a few people were asking me, and I wanted to make sure that I had the ability to talk a little bit about it and give a little bit. She could have. She absolutely could have. She could have had a miscarried before him too, right? And not known. She was also, again, I don't know. Like, nothing he said has been, like I don't know what's the truth or not. There could have been other things, if she was doing the things that they say she was doing, but I've been told that, he was told that she wasn't. Yeah, it's a whole hullabaloo. But there's a few different reasons, right? But she was still able to carry him after she stopped taking the medication. So maybe he was her first, and they told her she had to take the medication, because we're talking the 80s, right? The early 80s or 80. So, it could be like that, right? That's what it is. It's that you begin. Well, it's not so much. I don't think it's toxins. I think, well, I guess it just fights it. Like it's an allergic reaction. Your body develops antigens for the antigen, right? It develops antibodies to the antigen, right? Probably Prudy's doctor. I think that Prudy had to deal with it. Actually, I think is what Prudy was saying. Men with Rh negative have more health issues. That might be real. I don't know. And really, honestly, I don't know if health issues. Like, I think most health issues we have now are like societal. Like, society is so fucked up about health that I think that a lot of it is everything within society. Toxemia, yeah, absolutely. I think that's all right, except for you take out the IC and you put them together. But yeah, yeah, toxemia. Um, yeah. Okay, so the toxins to fight, yeah. But it's more the what it's an antibody too, right? Like the toxemia is a different thing, I think. Toxemia is something that most pregnant women can get. I don't think it has to do with the RH alone. I mean, in that factor, it probably had more do or the RH probably increased it, right? But toxemia can happen in a lot of women. But uh yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense because that's basically what an antigen is, or an antibody is. It's a poison for what's coming in, right? So health is very much more food and environmental induced, I think. But I mean, I know that some things will actually give prevalence, higher percentage, higher chance, right? But I do believe medicine really is just so. Yeah, our food is absolutely horrendous. Am I what, Canadian or American? I don't identify as either. Um, I am a citizen of the United States. Uh, but I wouldn't call myself an American. I would only identify as a citizen of the United States when asked. I identify as Indigenous, though I do not belong to a nation, so I don't identify by nation. Um, but I grew up outside of society. I grew up removed from society, and so I don't identify this as who I am. It's been a pretty small live this morning, which is actually a lot easier for me, I think. I love the large lives on so many levels, but at the same point, they're just so trolly sometimes. I'm something else. Yes, I love that identity. I think what I love about it is it so perfectly impersonates the resilience within us, right? Like, the way that Turtle Island indigenous people have always been able to take the colonizers' shit and turn it against them, right? Like, or flip it, right? Make it an advantage, right? Uh, the if you don't know something else, as an identifier for indigenous people in Turtle Island came about in 2020. Came about in 2020. And what happened was the Dakotas were putting their votes up during the election in 2020. and it would say this percent, this demographic voted this demographic votes this percent, this demographic votes this percent. And you see on the screen, European American or white Americans vote this percent, Black Americans vote this percent, uh, Hispanic Americans voted this percent, Asian Americans voted this percent, something else votes 6%. And like I think that was just hilarious. Like I think and it was less than 24 hours and that indigenous that had been turned within the indigenous community into almost a resilience cry of something else, right? We are something else. Yeah. To me, that's just this perfect example of how the resilience within the indigenous community works, right? Like that. Oh, you think so? Okay, we got you. We play you. We play you. Like we'll play with this, right? So I found it really, really beautiful, beautiful, a great example. I love that though. Something else. Yeah. So we've talked about the theory of race and how the theory of race has been debunked. We talked about academia using the theories. Oh, have a great one, Alan. We've talked about how anthropology and archaeology and early usage of race as an othering and a creation of society. We've talked about how we get adaptations. We've talked about how the adaptation for light skin is not a species advantage, it's just an adaptation, and that black skin is actually a species advantage. Uh, is there anything that I am missing that people have questions over that makes them go, or I didn't quite understand this? And that is absolutely it, Jedi. A united people scares them. A united people is a threat, right? If they can convince you that you should hate the homeless, this is a combo today, that you should hate the homeless, or you should hate the immigrants, or you should hate a certain demographic, instead of seeing how they're robbing you blind, they can control you. This isn't the color I'm wearing today. The brand that I use is Kada. I got like 9 or 10 of them off of Amazon. That's my black and my blue and my purple. This is yellow, but I used a red lip to kind of give it an orange because my color scheme today is red and orange and yellow. I don't know if you can see that on YouTube. And so I was trying to match my pants. Yeah. But it is. It's anything to divide and conquer. Thank you so much. It's anything to divide and conquer. It's anything to keep us down. It's anything to hold control. It's anything to ensure that we don't go, what the fuck are you doing? It's anything to ensure that we're not going, hey, listen, I don't have food or shelter. Like I was supposed to be guaranteed food and shelter. Like that's right to life, right? So we really have this point where it's anything to keep you in check so that the narcissistic god kings of our society can roll around in their Scrooge McDuck hoard, right? So that they can swim in their gold and send dick-shaped rockets out into space. That's really what it is, right? And it is. It's very disheartening. It's very disheartening. I remember coming back from Standing Rock, and I came back because I was driving through the Badlands in 4 feet of snow. And I had not been able to get a hold of my ex, who had not let me see my children for Thanksgiving when I had gone home for it. And I was trying to get a hold of my kids. I hadn't been able to talk to my kids. He would not let me talk to my kids. Every time I talked to the kids, he'd scream at me on the phone through the kids. I finally get a hold of him, And he tells me he's taken me to court. He filed an emergency order to remove the kids from seeing me at all because of me being in Standing Rock. And he stated that I was doing drugs and having orgies over there. Um, and I got out and I hit the knees in the snow. Like I remember just being in the middle of the Badlands and just being in like 3 feet of snow, like surrounding my body as I just sunk because I just couldn't. Like I just, and it was all to control me because I left and he's a narcissist and he's pissed that his property left and he's made that clear and everything, right? Um, and so I left Standing Rock for that. And I came back to my mother's space in Western Washington because I was trying to figure out how to, deal with this. And I had my mother with me at the time because I had taken her to Standing Rock. She took out a bunch of wool and was teaching spinning and stuff. And when we got back, um, I remember being on the phone to my sister, who is probably as normy as they get. Like she's pretty straight laced. And she just can't understand. And I'm like, I just can't do this anymore. I'm so tired of this society. I don't want to live in this society anymore. I don't want to deal with this society anymore. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. We live in a society that demonizes the victims, that's demonized being having trauma inflicted on you. That's made the person that the trauma has been inflicted on, the victim, into the evil, right? We victim blame. We use the word victim as a bad word. We all avoid being victims. Don't be a victim, right? And all of the people that we are marginalizing or beating or destroying or trying to harm, um, we demonize and, why are you being such a victim, right? And the people who are truly out to harm others are the ones who are making it, right? Are the ones who are living in nice houses and driving in nice cars. They're the ones that the lawyers listen to. They're the ones that the judges listen to. If you don't have 5 grand in Oregon, you can't get a family attorney. And if your spouse has a family attorney and you don't, a judge doesn't listen to you. They tell you you need an attorney and you go, I was financially abused for a decade and I don't have access to an attorney. Can you help me? And they go, you can call the Oregon State Bar and get a modest means attorney if you can find one that does modest means in your area, and you still need to come up with 2,500 down up front, right? So we have a justice system that doesn't work for anybody. Not only does it not work for marginalized groups, but the only people it actually works for are those who buy in and pay high. That's it. You have to buy in and pay high, right? And this is our justice system. This is our governmental system. This is your worth and value to anybody. Nobody asks you, what do you love? What do you create? What do you make? What are you passionate about? We say, what do you do? What's your job? How easily are you exploited by others? Right? Where are you on the exploitable scale? Right? Yeah. And that is where I hit I'm done. I just can't do this anymore. I can't be a part of this society anymore. And then I had to because, I need my children in my life, right? I can't walk away from my children. So I had to partake and move to the city, right? Still partake as very little as I possibly can and still got stiffed over every which way from Sunday by society. But I feel that it's exhausting. It's exhausting and it's depressing and it's overwhelming. Um, and I have hit rock bottom. I've hit those moments where I say that my dog saved me. And my dog saved me because uh, I had to sign away custody of my children on the same day that I left that and went to my job only to find out that 2 of the 3 people that owned the company were embezzling. And so the company shut down. And nothing I did, I couldn't get into a home so that I could see my children. Like I couldn't find a place here in Oregon because they wouldn't give me a place because my ex had left everything in my name. And so like all of the debt was in my name and no jobs were in my name, right? Um, and so I had a hard time getting a place, and I was walking downtown. I'm taking the bus 2 hours every morning to work and 2 hours every night home, leaving my house at 4:30 in the morning. Nobody is seeing my dog during the day, because my dog is locked in a room during the day because I live in the boarding house at this point. And, I knew that nobody would see my dog if I didn't make it home that night. But I remember looking at a bus and thinking, if I just stepped out in front of the train as it was coming, then it would be an accident. I can't commit suicide. I can't unalive myself, because, if I unalive myself, my children will know that their mother unalived herself, and if my children find out that their mother unalived themselves, it will destroy my children, and that's not okay, right? Uh, I can't harm my children. This is the reason that I had stopped being suicidal after my first birth, right? I can't harm my children by unaliving myself. Um, but if it's an accident, then I didn't do it to myself. I could step out in front of this train and I could end it. All I do is damage everybody. And if I'm not here, he won't be fighting me and they won't be weapons in a war, right? So they will actually be better off without me, right? Because they won't grow up being used against me or used as weapons, which he is what he did, and continues to do. Um, and it was, my dog is at home and nobody will find him for a week. He'll starve to death before anybody finds him, before anybody realizes that I'm dead. I'm in a town where nobody knows me. Um, my parents, nobody, like there's nobody that knows me for 300 miles. Nobody will realize I'm dead and my dog will starve before they find me. Right. And that's what saved my life. Right. This society is overwhelming and depressing. This is why we have high rates of unaliving, especially among young men. This is why most of us walk around in a state of depression because of this society. Because this society takes and takes and takes. It teaches you that the people that are supposed to love you, um, can take from you. We teach that our partners are our possessions. That's my man. That's my woman. How dare she look at somebody else? How dare you talk to them? Right? We teach that our partners are possessions. We teach that our children are possessions. Right? We teach this disconnected, owned space. And we teach that certain people aren't people. And it creates a deep longing and a deep ache and a deep depression, right? So I feel that. Um, the thing that makes me live through, the thing that makes me stop, the thing that I haven't been suicidal in a long time now. It's just I'll just move into the middle of the woods and nobody has to be affected by me, right? If I can move in the middle of the woods, then I don't have to deal with people, and people don't. I can't harm anybody if I'm in the middle of the woods. Um, what I have to remember and what pulls me through when I look at society and go, I can't deal with this anymore. I can't deal with society anymore, is change, right? Is change. Is the knowledge and the understanding that even if it's just talking to somebody in the street, even if it's just having these conversations, even if it's just small, even if it's just screaming into the wind, I'm making change. And that the only thing that has ever affected change in this world is a small group of people who are like minded. It's the only thing that's ever done it, right? It takes a small group of like minded individuals to affect change. And for me, oh, yeah, I would. Yeah. I can totally well, I'm leaving the United States as soon as the children are old enough. Like, as soon as the kids are 18, I'm gone. Um, I can't do it before then, but as soon as my sons reach 18, both of them, I've got a couple more years and then I'm gone just because I can't do the United States anymore. Um, but um, what keeps me going, keeps me from offing myself is the idea of I have to create change because if I go, everybody else still has to deal with it, right? If I'm not, everybody else has to, right? And so I would rather affect change so that nobody else has to, because just taking care of myself doesn't work for me, right? I don't know yet. It will depend on the time. Honestly, I plan on going everywhere for 6 months, right? 6 months to Iceland, months to Scotland, 6 months to Wales, 6 months to or Cymru, 6 months to several different spaces within Africa, 6 months, just everywhere, 6 months. And then once I've gone everywhere for 6 months, I'll settle somewhere. I've planned that for a long time. To me, that's the ideal, just because then I can see everything. I want to see everything. Sweden is top of my list. That's where the grave that I study is in Björkö in Sweden, the island of Björkö in Mälaren, Lake Mälaren in Sweden. And so that's why Swedish is my second language, because Sweden is or Swedish was the second language that I chose for uh, my BA, because that grave there, and because Sweden is someplace I'm going to go. And I have ancestry in Sweden and Sami ancestry, right? And so I want to go and see those things and learn and reconnect on some levels. And that's really for me what all of it will be, is a reconnection, right? It will be a reconnective journey, like finding the different spaces of my ancestry and reconnecting to my ancestry, reconnecting to the earth. For me, Sleepy laughs at me about this. Uh, I want earth. I want to taste the soil. That's it for me, is to be able to taste the soil in every space, to be able to smell the biome in every space, to smell that fresh scent in the woods, to sink into it. That's what it is for me. It's about the ancestry, but it's also about that connection to space. I think for a lot of people within the United States, if you don't have Turtle Island indigenous roots here, there's a disconnect, right? But when you're in a space that your ancestors have been singing in for thousands of years, there's a different feel, right? Um, and to me, that's important. I want to be able to taste that, right? I'll see you there too. Yeah, let's go. No, I haven't been to the Sami Cultural Center in Duluth. Where's Duluth? I know it's a state here. I just don't remember which state it's in. No, I have a friend who saw me, who he's Pita saw me, and we weren't in Standing Rock together, but he was in Standing Rock and I was in Standing Rock at the same time. We didn't meet each other until afterwards, but he's here on the West Coast, just a little bit above me, and we actually go and hang out together, and we've gone protesting together and stuff, um, and we talk a lot. Uh, and that's where I first started learning about Sami people, but I didn't find out about my own Sami heritage until 2021. Sweden, yeah, I'm totally Duluth, I know it's Minnesota. Yeah, okay. And I'm like it's an M word, but I wanted to say Idaho at the same time, and I was like, that's not it, right? Um, I will absolutely. We're That's the other thing is before my partner likes working. It's a function thing for them. They like having the something to do, and they're also always been a very physically active person, and so for them, working is part of doing, right. And so they want to work for a little bit longer, but once they're done, the plan is to first travel all of the United States if they get done before the boys are old enough. There's a lot of places within the U.S. I still want to see, right? Yeah. Well, I have friends in Sweden too. Like the woman who taught me is Swedish, and she's here in Portland, but she's got family over there. And then I've got other people that I've known for a hot minute. They're up in Sweden. Um, how did white people arrive? Um, Local, do you mean how do we get light skin, or do you mean how do white people arrive in Turtle Island, the United States? just to clarify, because I can answer both of those, and I just want to make sure that I'm answering the right question. And um, ignorance is not knowing. It's okay to not know. Um, it is okay to ask things that you don't know, right? It's when you choose to not know, when you don't want to know, that things become a problem. When you choose to be willfully ignorant, right, that is a problem. So questions are always welcome. Any asking of clarification or understanding is should always be welcome, right? Um, because we know that a lack of knowledge harms, whereas a presence of knowledge gives, right? Uh, to Turtle Island, the first Europeans get to Turtle Island with Leif Erikson. Uh, and the Vinland Saga. Turtle Island does equal North America. First Europeans in North America. Let's start with I want to make sure that because it goes into Greenland first, and I want to make sure that I'm on Vinland first. Our first examples of the Black Plague and literacy are written of in the sagas. And actually, so is this weird example that I'm going to read you really quick of zombieism. Thorstein the farmer then took Gudrid from her stool into his arms and sat with her on the bench across from her husband Thorstein's corpse, and said many encouraging things, consoling her and promising her that he would take her to Eriksfjord with her husband Thorstein's body and those of his companions. And we'll invite other people to stay here, he said, to provide you with solace and companionship. She thanked him. Thorstein Eriksson, the corpse, then sat up and spoke. Where is Gudrid? 3 times he spoke these words, but she remained silent. Then she spoke to Thorstein the farmer and said, shall I answer his question or not? He told her not to answer. Thorstein the farmer then crossed the floor and sat on the chair, and Gudrid on his knee. Then Thorstein the farmer spoke, what is it you want, namesake? And Thorstein the corpse answers after a short pause, I want to tell Gudrid her fate, to make it easier for her to resign herself to my death, for I have gone to a good resting place. I can tell you, Gudrid, that you will be married to an Icelander and that you will live a long life together. And you have many descendants, promising, bright and fine, sweet and well-scented. You will leave Greenland to go to Norway and from there to Iceland and set up house in Iceland. Our first zombieism. Let me get to the saga of the Greenlanders or the Icelanders. So Eric the Red saga really, I think, is when we see the very first example that's in Greenland. Sorry, I know it's taking me forever to find what I want. Oh, I'm not sure if this is. Okay. They sailed along the coast of the western settlement, then to Bear Island. After 2 days at sea, they sighted land and rowed over in boats to explore it. Then they found many flat slabs of stone so large that 2 men could lie foot to foot across them. There were many foxes there. They gave the land Halalund, stone slab land. After that, they sailed with a northerly wind for 2 days and again sighted land with large forests and many islands. An island lay to the southeast off the coast where they discovered a bear and called it Bjarni, Bear Island, and the forested land itself, Markland. After another 2 days passed, they again sighted land and approached the shore where the peninsula jutted out. They sailed upwind along the coast, leaving this land on the starboard. The country was so wild with long shoreline and sand flats. They rowed ashore in boats and discovered the keel of a ship there and named this point Kjarnis or Keel Point. They also gave the beaches the name Furdrustrander, Wonder Beaches. After this, coastline was indented with numerous inlets which they skirted in their ships. After sailing the length of Furdrustrader, they put the 2 Scots ashore and told them to run southwards to explore the country and return before 3 days' time had elapsed. They were dressed in a garment known as a kiafia, which had a hood at the top but no arms, and was opened at the side and fastened between the legs with a button and a loop. That's interesting. The ship cast anchor and lay to during this time. After 3 days had passed, the 2 returned to the shore, one of them with grapes in hand, and the other with self-sown wheat. Carlsny said they had found good land. This cannot be. This has to be up in Greenland. This is probably in between the two. We have a keel here, which is going to be something that is... But they already have Tale of Vinland in this. No, this is absolutely... So this is actually southern. This would probably be along the east coast of the United States. And the reason is because we enter into chapter 9. It says they then began to discuss and plan the continuation of their journey. Thornhall wanted to head north past Fjordstadter and around Kielerns to seek Vinland. Karlsvini wished to sail south along the east shore, feeling the land would be more substantial the further south it was, and he felt it was advisable to explore both. So this is where we see this first understanding that there is this land here. They leave. They don't encounter anyone. But what they do know, they stay there for a fortnight, enjoying themselves and finding nothing unusual. They had taken their livestock with them. Early one morning, they noticed 9 hide-covered boats, and the people in them waved wooden poles that made a swishing sound as they turned them around sunwise. Kosny spoke, "What can this mean?" Snorri replied, "It may be a sign of peace. We should take a white shield and lift it up and return." This they did. The others then rowed towards them and were astonished at the sight of them as they landed on the shore. They were short in height, with threatening features and tangled hair on their heads. Their eyes were large and their cheeks broad. They stayed there a while, marveling, then rowed away again to the south around the point. The group had built their booths up above the lake, with some of the huts further inland and others closer to the shore. They remained there that winter. There was no snow at all, and the livestock could fend for themselves outdoor. So this is, I don't think this itself is Vinland. This is what they call hop, tidal pool. But this is in North America. They describe it as having all sorts of vines and food. They also describe the people. They do describe killing the people as well, right? This is in 900, I think. Let me double check the dating of when they believe that it's happening. 970 to 1030. This is a map of it. And this has them going from Iceland into Greenland. So what we have is Labrador is Markland here. Hellalund is this space up here between Greenland and North America. This is Newfoundland, and they have found the Viking settlements in Newfoundland. Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. And so what they're showing is a landing in Hululand, a landing in Labrador, Markland, here on Bell Island, here on Les Annes aux Meadows, and a couple of landings in Prince Edward Island, right? This book is The Sagas of the Icelander. It's just a translation with a preface by Jane Smiley. I think that you search it as The Sagas of the Icelanders with a preface, but I think that the main editor is Orn Olafur Thorolfsson. But it's a translation. See you later, Harris. But this is in the 900s. And so that's our first Europeans here within the Turtle Islands. Okay, so how do we get white skin? Absolutely, absolutely. So light skin comes about as a genetic adaptation. The genetic gene for it, goes back about 900,000 years to to Homo erectus. We see that it translates from Homo erectus into Homo heidelbergensis, that translates into both Neanderthals and us. Homo heidelbergensis being what we believe both Neanderthals and us come from. That gene within Homo neanderthalis, having speciated outside of Africa, they speciate generally lighter. They still have dark skin, and it's not as light as like North European, but generally lighter. And we see that Homo sapien, while still having lighter skin occasionally within the groups within Africa that are speciating into, they're generally darker. Both groups have the ability to go dark or light. Not super light yet, but light. But you'll see that Homo sapiens are predominantly dark and Neanderthals are predominantly light. When Homo sapiens and Neanderthals meet together in the Levant, we've been inbreeding since we start. Like their current estimates is that we've been inbreeding with Neanderthals for like 285,000 years, right? And so in that, we see that the recessive gene for light skin within Homo sapien meets the recessive and dominant gene for light skin within Neanderthal. And then it becomes a recessive gene still within us for the most part. Occasionally, you're going to see it pop up. When we leave the Levant area at about 50,000 years ago, because that's when Homo sapien leaves the Levant, the last ice age is receding through Europe. And as it goes up, the ice leaves, we move in. And we don't get to Ireland until like 8,000 years ago. Scandinavia is like 7,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago, we see that the people within North Europe or West Europe that are in those spaces are still very dark. And the alleles are called, are named as the same alleles that we see demonstrated in sub-Saharan African skin tone. And so we believe that the skin tone is what we would currently associate as sub-Saharan. And the skin tone for Europeans 10,000 years ago is predominantly dark. We see it about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. We start to see it shift to, you're seeing like roughly a midway point of, half dark, half light. And in northern climes, not necessarily down lower. We see that when people move into Scandinavia at 7,000 years ago, there are two groups that move in. The Sami people, the Finno-Ugric people who have been within Asia and then come over, they are coming in light with dark eyes. Again, predominantly light with dark eyes. That does not mean that there's not dark skin within their group, and that the people who speak in Proto-Indo-European, so currently what we call Indo-Europe, or currently what we call Europeans, coming up are darker of skin with blue eyes, light eyes. Light eyes is a low light adaptation, and we get that first because we need that. We don't necessarily need light skin; it just helps. It takes 100 year or 100 generations for an adaptation to happen. An adaptation being the environment says that this would benefit us, and so we start breeding to have more of that. We start genetically having more of that. I will give you a second on that one. I'll answer that one in a second, King. Um, so when we see that at about 6,000 years ago, you're going to see 50% light skin. 2,000 years ago, we see about 70 to 80% light skin. 1,000 years ago in the sagas, we're seeing 10% is still dark skin. Egil is dark skinned, and there are several other people within the sagas demonstrated as being dark skinned. We get this because, to our understanding, it helps with our taking in of vitamin D. And we have less need of the high melanin to prevent UV damage in northern climes. There's recent studies that state that it might have to do with cold as well, like it's a heat retention, but we haven't like dug in yet, so we don't know for positive. It's just recent, but it is understood that it's a recessive genetic that becomes a predominant genetic in certain areas. We also know that pretty much any northern latitude across the globe or extreme southern latitude across the globe is going to have light skin. And this is because of Arctic regions. It's, seen a lot in Arctic regions. And again, it's over time of being in those regions, your body adapts to those regions. In Africa, actually, we see every skin color represented, and we actually see every eye color and hair style, or not style, but texture represented in Africa. We also see every height represented in Africa. Um, and this is pre-contact, right? Like in the genetics of pre-contact finds, right? So we do see that all of these genes definitely come from us, from Africa, right? Um, our predominance of them in certain areas just comes from our bodies adapting to work better in those areas. But this also means that light skin is not a genetic advantage for Homo sapien, it's an adaptation for Homo sapien. The genetic advantage or the species advantage for Homo sapien is actually dark skin because it does work everywhere where light skin does not. Light skin will get you killed in some spaces. Yes, absolutely. So, why is there a dispute of Africans in Turtle Island? First of all, I'm not going to say the last word you said in there because that last word is a slur. The term is Aboriginal. Um, uh, People are Aboriginal. Aborigines, the INES is a slur. Um, so, what you're referring to is something that is called Wabu, wannabe Aboriginal. And what it is stating that Turtle Island indigenous people were not here, that the people that Columbus found were Africans who had been here a couple hundred years, only a couple hundred years. They had come over with Mansa Musa's, I think, either Mansa Musa or his predecessor. This is based on a book that was written in the 70s that's been debunked. And pretty much all of the evidence has no factual base to it and doesn't work very well. Uh, but there is this belief. This group of people believes that Turtle Island indigenous people are half black and half white. That they are not, in fact, they will often call them white or European. And that they are not from Turtle Island, that they are half of the black people that were already here and half of the white people that came in. And this group also believes that the transatlantic trade does not happen, that Africans were not stolen from Africa. Indigenous is not the problem. The word that Aboriginal is not a problem. The INES is a slur because it's been used against Indigenous Australians as the slur. And that's why I'm trying to make sure that people understand that the word for Aboriginal that ends in INES is a slur. Um, Aboriginal is not, and Indigenous is not. It's INES at the end of Aboriginal, right? And again, it's because it's been used against Indigenous Australians as a slur. Um, so, uh, First of all, there's a lot of problematic to here, right? First of all, Turtle Island Indigenous people don't look half black, half white. That's not what half black, half white looks like. It's a totally different look, right? First of all, just like first of all, off the top of my head, like that's not what that looks like. Like we've all seen children who are half black and half white before. We probably have a lot of friends who are half black, half white. We see this all over the space, beautifully. I mean, beautifully demonstrated. Usually, people who are half black and half white are extremely stunning. Um, but it does not look like Turtle Island Indigenous, right? It's a totally different look, right? And the rest of this stuff becomes problematic as well. Uh, a is deciding that a group of people didn't exist and that they don't have it's telling a group of people that their ancestry is wrong, that their histories is wrong. It's trying to replace and erase a group of people, um, which is really white supremacist, right? Just really white supremacist of people. And then it also in ignoring the fact that the transatlantic slave trade happened, it also gives out for the Europeans on accountability for that, right? It gives an out to Europeans on being accountable for the transatlantic slave trade, which in and of itself is a horrific thing. Like all the other parts of genocide that happen, they're all horrific. But sorry, YouTube, that was not the way I wanted you to see me. But in and of itself, the transatlantic slave trade is extremely horrific, right? We're talking about disconnecting a group of people from their entire families, right? And transporting them into a whole new environment where their bodies are not equipped for, that they do not understand. There's so much horror in it. If you have not looked into the transatlantic slave trade, I suggest that you do. No, go. Sorry, Grand Cat's at my door scratching, and I don't want to scratch at my door. If you have not looked into it, I recommend you do. The horrors of the transatlantic slave trades are horrible. No, King. That's not correct. So first of all, I'm going to show a picture. This is going to pause my live as I show this picture, okay? Because I have to pull it up. Sorry, guys, on YouTube. I have to get him from doing that. Okay, we haven't talked on this for a hot minute, so it took me a minute for me to find it. This is the Olmec heads. The Olmec heads, Lucy is in Africa, but I don't think that's what it is. No, Meckel. I'll explain that one in a second too. So this is the Olmec heads. Everybody says that the Olmec heads are evidence of African people being in Turtle Island, but as you can see, the Olmec heads are Turtle Island indigenous in phenotype. These are all Turtle Island indigenous peoples who are currently in Turtle Island that are belonging to primary populations, so with less admixture within them. And so you can absolutely see where the Turtle Island indigenous people definitely look like the Olmec heads. The one that that you were talking about, where they're like, where there is this find of a black woman in South America. And I think it's 8,000 years old, which is not the oldest find we have here in Turtle Island, by the way. But what it is they're looking at her skeletal structure. And in looking at her skeletal structure, They are they're defining it as having and I don't like this terminology, but they actually define it in their research as mongoloid, okay, features. And what they're seeing is this uses a phrenology, which states that different races exist, which they don't. Race does not exist, and that different groups within race display different skeletal structure, which they do not. And we understand within forensic anthropology that just like on average, a girl may be shorter than a guy, that averages do not make a whole. And whereas on average, you might find maybe broader nostrils within African people, you're also going to find broader nostrils within North European people as well, right? On average, you might find a flatter nose maybe within certain groups, but on average, you're going to find that same flat nose in different groups, right? So we understand that phrenology is not accurate. The find in South America has since, I believe, actually been DNA tested. But the idea that she was African was based on phrenology, and it was incorrect, phrenology being a pseudoscience. The DNA of every pre contact Turtle Island indigenous find that we have shows that they have Denisovian ancestry and they have gone through Asia. That they had at least 10,000 years to mix with the Denisovian people within Asia. Um, and we also see that there is a ghost species in Turtle Island indigenous people that we don't see anywhere else either, um, and that they have Neanderthal. So, Turtle Island indigenous people by DNA pre contact um, have been out of Africa for 50,000 years. Um, and that's pre contact DNA. And it also shows the migration pattern from the Levant, where they mixed with Neanderthals, like everybody else did, including people that went back into Africa and took Neanderthal DNA into Africa, because all of Africa, except for the Oyo people and the Khoisan people, have Neanderthal DNA pre-contact. And this is again from pre-contact finds. Um, so they mix with Neanderthal in the Levant, and then they move through Asia, and they spend about 10,000 years minimum in Asia, and mix in Southeast Asia, or the southern part of East Asia, right? And mix with Denisovian there before it is currently believed that they take a southern boat route to South America. This is our latest articles and finds that are coming out that are using this DNA to actually trace the migration route. And the migration route through DNA actually shows a southern route through Australasia, because they pick up Australasian DNA on the way over. There is, we all come from Africa. Every single last one of us ancestor back to Africa, right? But indigenous Turtle Islanders were no more African on the arrival of Europeans than Europeans were African on the arrival of Europeans in Turtle Island. And I think that that's an important point. They had been out of Africa the same amount of time as everybody else had been out of Africa. And they had actually picked up so many different groups of DNA along the way. And currently, we know that Turtle Island indigenous people have been in the Turtle Islands for at least 33,000 years. So, if Turtle Island indigenous people who have been here for at least 33,000 years, even if they had not picked up Neanderthal and Denisovian DNA along the way, they were no longer African by the time Columbus arrived, right? Any more than Europeans were African when Columbus arrived, right? So, that's why no. um, and I again want to point out that the major problems with this um, is the fact that you're erasing people with it. When people use this idea, they erase the transatlantic slave trade. My grandmother came over on the Middle Passage. Okay, Felindra is Emily Jane's grandmother or mother, and she escaped slavery, pregnant with her master's child in the 1750s. Her family line is Sudanese. She was stolen from the Sudan and brought over on the Middle Passage. I've known that my whole life. I've known that my whole life. I have uh, carried pain with the epigenetics within my bones, and carried pain within my knowledge and my memory my whole life for what they went through. Um, Emily Jane and her children passed, and they had to pass down through the ages to maintain, right? Because that's what passing is. It's to try and live. That's what passing is. People want to go against it, but passing is literally I'm trying to stay alive, right? Then nobody tells people they're passing. We do that today. A lot of people do that today, but when we do that today, people are doing that today to show that they know. Like as an Indigenous person, I have in the past said I'm white passing. And why I say that is because I want you to understand that this is a skin tone. This isn't a personality. This is a skin tone. This is not who I am, right? I look white. I'm white assumed, which we have decided, a lot of us have decided is a way better way to say that, right? But when people passed, they never said that. If you found out they were passing, they were dead. Nobody said it. Nobody claimed it. They just did it. It wasn't a claim, and it wasn't to be a traitor. It wasn't to betray. In fact, most people who passed actually worked very hard for their communities to try and bring most people up, right? But it was to live in a world where that's the way they had to keep their children alive, and they had that opportunity. Um, who wouldn't, given the opportunity, right? Um, so we see that when we try and state that Turtle Island Indigenous people were here, that the Middle Passage didn't happen, that the transatlantic slave trade didn't happen, we are not only erasing Indigenous people to Turtle Island, but we are erasing the transatlantic slave trade. And it really just gives Europeans a lack of accountability. And everybody that I know wants the Europeans to start being accountable, right? They keep claiming wins, but they don't claim their losses. We hear all about how great they are, but we never hear where they fucked up, right? They want to they're already teaching the transatlantic slave trade as is basically indentured servitude, and we brought them here. And how great of us to provide them passage and a home and clothes and labor to do while they got here, right? And give them a better opportunity in the new world, right? We already teach that shit. Don't don't contribute. Don't contribute to the Europeans getting away with shit. This has been them using this shit to unalive entire groups of people for generations. Don't give them an excuse. Don't let them say it didn't happen. Nah, we didn't do that, right? And so this is why I have a problem with it. Because when we use that, when people utilize that, um, they're erasing half of my heritage, right? They're not only erasing the Middle Passage heritage that I have, but they're also erasing my Indigenous heritage, and I have problems with that. And I think that we should all have problems with anybody trying to erase anybody else, and we should all have problems with anybody giving excuses to horror, right? I think that the minimum that we should all be doing is saying no to that, refusing to allow those things to happen anymore. The minimum that we should all be doing is saying no, you don't get to erase my grandmother's time in the Middle Passage, and no, you don't get to erase my other grandmother's horror, right? And so it's very important in that, and also in trying to claim culture, right? That's cultural appropriation. If you know, why the hell you put on a war bonnet? That's a Purple Heart. That's stolen valor. That's not just cultural appropriation. That's stolen valor. What is my descent? Everywhere. There's not a place in the globe that I don't descend from. There's not any culture on the globe that I don't have ties to. My blood ties are literally global. That's awesome, King. Andean. That's a great. That's God. The Andean people were freaking amazing, right? Um, yeah, you're like me. You got a little bit of everything, right? A little bit of everything, which is one of the beautiful things that we are allowed to have, right? Like that little bit of everything just makes everybody family. It just makes us all cousins. I have a little bit of everything, so everybody on the planet is family. I come from everywhere, so everybody on the planet is family, right? Which just gives that communal, right? Oh, no. Are you okay? Did you get a look at him pretty? Yes, only. Um, so Caucasian is defined as the Caucasus region, which is Levant, Caucasus, which is right above. It's either India or Turkey. I always get them backwards. I think it's Turkey, right above Turkey. Um, okay, okay, uh, okay. Keep me posted. And you see that the Caucasian is actually defined as the Caucasus region, the Levant area in North Africa. That's Caucasian. Uh, North European is almost translucent in skin color comparatively, right? North European is what we consider white. Caucasian is not what we consider white, right? When I was in Iraq, in Kuwait, I remember talking to somebody in Iraq, and it was weird for me because even though I had grown up with Iranian people, or spent some time in an Iranian school, I didn't know because I was little when this happened. And when I got to Iraq, I remember like as I was doing, we would do burn pits, and I would stand guard over burn pits. And I remember talking to a young man, and there was a young girl who was pretty light with freckles and bright red hair. And I was like, holy crap. And he goes, yeah, we're Caucasian, right? I mean, you should know that. And I'm like, oh shit. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Um, so all of that is Caucasian, all of it. We absolutely see that Caucasian is darker than I am, right? I might be considered Caucasian, but I'm probably a little bit on the light side for Caucasian. What we think of as Caucasian is actually North European, and it's only in those northern European latitudes that we really get the translucent. We see that in the northern Asian latitudes that ultralight still has this kind of undertone to it that prevents the translucence. And the same thing in the northern Turtle Island latitudes that are ultralight. They still have this kind of an undertone to their skin that prevents that translucence. That is weird, right? Um, Well, so again, race doesn't exist, right? Like the idea that there's a white race, a black race, a yellow race, a red race, right? None of that exists. Culture exists, ethnicity exists, heritage exists, but race doesn't exist. Yes, the Italians and the Irish were considered to be along the same lines as African Americans for a long period of time. Um, Still not slaves, still not chattel slaves within the United States. But they were treated with the same hate, right? Um, and they were only recently classified as being white, right? This is actually why we have Columbus Day in our country, because the Italian Americans were not classified as white, and they were like you had the same issues of no blacks, no Italians, no Irish, we won't serve these people, right? And so when Italian Americans become classified as white and you see this forward movement, you start to see Columbus becoming that like hero because he was Italian, right? But yeah, Italy is, it can be very dark. Though like Spain is really light, and most people don't think Spain is really light, especially in the United States, because we think Spanish is Mexican. Mexican is half indigenous, right? Anybody of darker skin in Mexico or in South America is darker skin because they're indigenous. Whereas in Spain, like Lionheart, Richard Coeur de Lion's wife, Berengian was Berengia was a Spanish, and she had pale blonde hair and blue eyes, right? And the Spanish are Celts, right? Italy is not Celtic, it's Latin, except for the northern part of Italy, which is Celtic or was traditionally Celtic before the Romans conquered it, right? Mizzicanos, yeah. Well, and the reason Northern Italians are lighter is because of the fact that Southern Italians are Italian and Northern Italians are Celtic. They're the Celtoid people in Northern Italy. My multi-guest box is usually closed. There is a lot of Irish in Spain, yeah, but not at that time. Uh, Not pre, like, that's a later. Oyo, O-Y-O, amico, amico. I hope I said that right. I apologize if I didn't. Irish and Maori, yeah, Irish and Jamaica is very Irish too. In fact, I was listening to something on that yesterday, and they were talking about the accent and the Irish accent and the Jamaican accent being very similar. Yeah, well, I don't so 900s makes sense, but so in Spain, the Iberian Peninsula is Spain, right? The Iberian, people were Celts. The Iberian Peninsula was all Celtic, right? So, and actually, like, the Picts come across from Turkey, and they go up and over, and down into the Iberian Peninsula, leave the Pictones in the Iberian Peninsula, and then go up into Ireland, and then go over into Scotland, or up into yeah, Ireland, and then over into Scotland. We absolutely see that like the Celts actually are coming from Turkey originally, or the genetics come from Turkey, or and still remain in Turkey. That's the widest percentage of the Y DNA from the Picts. Um, but then it comes across and they leave group here and they go up. But we definitely see that the Iberian Peninsula is all Gael and all Celt, and Gaul is Celt, right? And is all Gaul and Celt when the Romans take it over, right? I do not know the Pima people. Where are the Pima people at? Fantasia. Parisi is Parisi is a Celtic tribe, Paris, and also Parsi, right? Which is a group in northern India, right? And this is Indo-European language, and this is a show of Indo-European language. Pima in is that a traditional tribal name or a traditional nation name, or is that a given nation name? I don't know. I'm not sure on that one. Pima. No, I don't. I do see that they're a group. I mean, I'm just looking at Google stuff right now. I do see it's a group, but I'm not seeing like I would have to do research to know anything more. And I tend not to try and do any research on indigenous groups based online. Like I tend to try and talk to indigenous groups themselves, but I do not know. It does say that they're in Arizona, though. Thank you, Michael. Mike. Quezam? 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 Is that no, I would not want to. So is it Quezam? I want to make sure my pronunciation is correct. I would not intentionally mispronounce. I was pronouncing at the beginning. I can't click. I can't. I've tried. Qu- Quay? Probably not. Um, so is it Sam? Is it better to say san than it is to say Koisan? Again, I want to make sure that I am Protocol incorrect. Am giving it correctly. I would not want to. I believe that. I believe that 100%. Quay? I don't usually open up my guest box just because I get really trolly in here and I try and make sure that I don't have just people popping up. But if you are willing to educate, I absolutely would love that and absolutely welcome that. It's very important to me not to mispronounce indigenous languages.
So yeah, Khoisan was coined by the zoologist Leonard Schultz, who used to hunt indigenous Kwe-Gam people of Southern Africa. And Khoisan is not a real word. Basically, it was the mispronunciation of Kwe-Gam. So I understand you might not be able to say that in general. It's Kwe-Gam, and Gam is an X, so it's a click instead of an S. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So more Quagon? Is that closer?
No, I would stick to Kwe.
Quay.
I would stick to Kwe. If you really want to say it, you can say the abattoir.
Abattoir?
Which is another name. Yeah, abattoir. Yeah. And it also comes from the fact that they're related. We are related to the Twa, which a lot of people call pygmies, which is a very condescending term for our people. They're not pygmies, but they're Twa. So abattoir would come from that, and then abattoir would also relate to Kwe. It would also relate to Abantu, which would mean Bantu people too.
Okay, so that makes sense.
It's just hard for us as South Africans to hear people say Khoisan.
Yeah.
We know it's a racial slur.
Yeah, well, and for me, being here in the United States, there's a lot of slurs around the world that I don't know, and I would never want to do that. Like, it's very important to me to speak indigenous languages correctly and to correctly identify peoples not by what their colonizers coined them as, but by who they are. So I very, very, very much appreciate that, and I welcome that in any space and in any time, because that's of high levels of importance to me. Would you do me a favor and type in at some point in chat the abattoir? And if I'm saying that wrong, please correct me. And so that I can make sure, because I also will be giving this information out, and I want to make sure that I give it out correctly because that's a big part of it. Like I was saying earlier, we don't use INES with Aboriginal because it is a slur for Australian Indigenous people, and we shouldn't be doing that. And so if I can identify that that word is a slur, then I can take and make sure that people are getting it correctly, at least as correctly as I, obviously, without being able to do the correct pronunciation. Unfortunately, I can roll my R's, but I can't click. I wish I could. But I want to make sure that I'm passing on. It's big to me to make sure that people understand that people don't want to be called by what their colonizers called them, right? So I appreciate that message and that information on every single level. I appreciate that. Thank you. And I appreciate your willingness to teach in love. That's very important.
Do you mind bringing me back? I got a call and I got an echo, so I kind of hear you, but I don't really hear you.
Okay. Do you need me to bring you back up as in the live? Or are you going to drop down? Okay, yeah, go ahead if you want to drop down.
I can't drop down for some reason because you don't have multiple guests, so you'd probably have to drop me down.
Haha. Sorry, I'm figuring this one out too. Let's see. There we go. There we go. Did that work better?
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I didn't hear the last part that you said. I heard like the colonizer's term for you or something like that.
Absolutely. It's very important to me to not use colonizers' terms for people. So I really am very grateful to you for giving us this knowledge, and for helping correct me because that's of high importance, and I know that I can't identify all the slurs, but when they are identified, I want to know so that I can pass that on, right? So that we can make sure. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I do appreciate that, and I would really appreciate if people stopped calling us Khoisan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will make sure that that information is out because, yeah, I think that that's important. I don't think a lot of people really, well, I know like within my community, within the archaeological and anthropological community in the United States, I don't think a lot of people even understand that. But that is real. Like most people are named terms that their colonizers gave them, not who they are, right?
And I won't lie to you, like white South Africans call us that too. They call us Khoisan. They'll be like Khoisan, they'll be like Abantu and stuff, and it's like you continuously using a racial slur for our names. And even when we say we are Kwekam, we understand you can't say it. If you can't, just say Kwe. That's why I say just say Kwe. Because Kwe means the same thing as Kam means. Kam means the same thing as Abattoir means. Abattoir means the same thing as Twa means. Twa means the same thing as Abantu, which is Bantu. So even like with the whole like empty land myth, Bantu migration myth, whatever people like saying, like the Bantu people migrated from this place to that place, it's not true. We have always been everywhere in Africa in general. It's just we go by different names, which would also be Kwekam. But with the division that they were trying to sow into us, they made different names so we wouldn't recognize each other. But when we started figuring it out, we were able to come to that because I've got Kwekam ancestry, and then I've also got Bantu ancestry. But Bantu and Kwekam ancestry is the same. There's no difference.
That makes sense.
Whatever 23andMe can give me, it doesn't matter because these are still my people. If I listen to the elders speak about our ancestral stories, they're talking about the exact same thing.
That makes sense.
So.
Well, and I don't know if you heard what we were saying, but we know that the Khoi people are the original people, that all the genetics of the human population are found within them. And so that is how we can tell that your people are the original group of us. Like this is where we start, and we can trace everybody back to it. Of course, not meaning everybody is Khoi, but that you are original, and that the vast group of people is original.
So I'm going to break it down to you again, right? Isn't it I just told you what Kwekam means,
yes.
Right? It means Abantu.
Yes.
It also means Twa, which would refer to the pygmies. So in your head, pygmies would be different to Khoisan, right? But Kwekam means the same thing as Twa would mean, right?
Yeah.
So it would mean the same thing. So there's no specific group of people who are indigenous to Africa. Because what would mean is that the Africans who were stolen and sent to the Americas are not indigenous to Africa, which would be incorrect. So even those who were stolen from Africa and shipped to America are also indigenous to Africa, whether or not they have Khoisan or Pygmy DNA or Bantu DNA. They are also indigenous to Africa.
Absolutely.
So there's no what they did to us was to make us think that there was a specific group that they made extinct. Because remember, they tell us that the Khoisan are like going extinct. That's not true. It's not true at all. Because we've got tons of Kwekam people within our neighborhoods, and I mean everywhere in Southern Africa. I mean everywhere in just above, maybe I'll say like the central. You know what I mean? Central Africa. We've got tons of Kwekam people who would be considered Khoisan, who would be considered Abattoir, who would be considered Abantu in general. So when I say that, I'm trying to explain that the indigenous people of Africa is usually everybody black. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, except for indigenous Australians, right? Like, so except for those that are black within indigenous Australia, because they're also in the same skin like category, like if we were categorizing. But no, that makes sense, and that's not what that doesn't disagree with what I was saying. Because what I was saying is that what they're saying is that when we look at genetics and when we look at like the human genome, we can state that the first groups of people start within the Khoi people, and that of course other groups are coming out afterwards, right? You know, as we move about, and they are stating now that all pretty much everything in South Africa together combined create the original, like that it's not just one group within like Homo heidelbergensis that creates the original Homo sapiens. But what they're saying is that's how they can trace all Homo sapiens back to having started there, is because the genetic diversity is the greatest within those groups.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Unfortunately, because I am more ancestral than I am scientific, it's very hard for me to even be able to meet you halfway. You know what I mean? Because what I do know is that you're right about the fact that everyone comes from the first landmass that erupted from the water, which is why we have Magaliesberg, where you can find the oldest bones of people. Does this mean that there weren't other people before them? No. Does it mean there weren't other people living amongst them who could have been older? No. You know what I mean? So as someone who went to Magaliesberg more than, I think, 10 times, I've seen it for myself. You know what I mean? And it only because I was intrigued that, oh, wow, we've got the oldest bones.
Right.
And then, but I didn't see this specific caption when I read this bone that there could have been another bone that no one found living amongst this bone. So in our ancestral stories, other races didn't come from us. I'm not going to lie to you. In our ancestral stories, other races did not come from us. They are their own creation. And us, as Black people in general, wherever we come from, I wouldn't say, you know, the Australians, I listen to them sometimes, but I do have an Australian on this app. They're Twi. They come from the Twi tribe, and they say that they're from Africa. But others say they're not. So I'm not going to debate because I'm not from Australia, so I'm not going to go back and forth with anyone. But when I listen to someone and they understand they're from Africa, that's who I will take it. You know what I mean? So in general, what I do know is that the Kwe and Gam people are already Bantu people, which means they're already the indigenous people, which means Kenyan, Tanzanian, Namibian, which West African, Central African would also be the original people.
Yes.
It doesn't take away from them being original people just because Southern Africa is known to be the ones with the ancestry that can tell. A lot has happened. There's been breeding farms, which is why I think you saw, I'm not sure if you saw my comment, but I was like, I'm waiting for the day where we stop speaking about like white people and where we can move on to speaking about what the Arabs did to Africans, what the Asians did to Africans, what the Indians did to Africans, because we keep putting the blame on little brother, but we're not going on to big brother and stuff. And so what it does, it minimizes our reality. It minimizes our lived experiences. It minimizes the way Africa looks, because people will tell us Africa is diverse, but Africa is not diverse. What happened was breeding farms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In North Africa alone, there was so much breeding farms, as well as white people being enslaved in North Africa, the Barbary slave trade, where they created a different race of a people who are supposedly indigenous to North Africa, which is incorrect. They're not. It comes from the enslavement and breeding farms of what happened in Africa. Then we go into the East Coast, the Horn, where you find the Somalis and the Ethiopians, the Djiboutians and stuff, Eritreans, who look alike, who you can tell may come from one ancestor. They don't look like the rest of Africa. So you can tell there's a mix of the Indian Ocean slave trade as well as the Arab slave trade within their DNA, which is why they were given power to enslave the black, which would mean the Bantu or Kwe or Kam or Nut or whatever you want to call it, of the African continent. They were given power to enslave our people. And I'm not going to lie, it's still happening today. It's still happening today. But no one wants to listen to us because, Africa is united. But also because white people don't want to also address Arabs and Indians and Asians of what they did. Instead, they put them in categories of being marginalized. But let's be honest. In Africa, are Asians, Indians, and Arabs marginalized? No, they're not. They are the colonizers. They are the destructors. They are the infiltrators. They come into our community, they take, steal, and destroy. That's what they've been doing. And I don't know how we're going to get past that subject because everyone wants to focus on what white people did. I'm tired of focusing on what white people did. White supremacy this, white privilege this, white this and that. But Arabs, Indians, and Asians are also benefiting off of white privilege? Then how is it called white privilege? Because when we go into the communities, as an African person going to African American communities, I see a beauty supply store owned by Asians. I see a gas station owned by Indians. I see a corner store owned by Arabs in the neighborhood, in the hood. Why is that a real thing? But you think that somehow they don't have some kind of supremacy within you? But it's easier for me to see it because I'm African. I can go back home and see them unalive my people, grape my people, create breeding farms off of my people, human traffic my people, make them drug mules. I can see it. I live that experience. I literally live that experience. And it's so hard because I've never seen, every time we have these conversations, always Black people calling out white people, saying white people are doing this and that. I can't even come in there and say anything because the person who looks like me is going to tell me, well, at the end of the day, America is not different. America is different. This is how it goes. But why is it only America that's different? Are we not going to speak about the white South Africans who came to America and took the jobs of the Black African Americans in the South? How were the white South Africans able to take the jobs of African American people in Mississippi? Why don't we speak about really what's going on? I feel like there's this ignorance and we choose to ignore it. And I don't only see it within Black people, I see it within white people too, because they're always, I'm trying my best this, I'm trying my best that. We will never dismantle white supremacy until white people start calling out Arabs, Indians, Asians, because white people, I hate to say it, white people are the weakest link.
Oh yeah, I'll agree with that.
They learned from everybody else. They did not create it. They did not know how to do this. They didn't. They learned from the Arabs. They learned from the Asians. They learned from the Indians. They did not create this through their own minds because white people were not in that time frame when the Arabs were literally enslaving Black African people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're right. There's this level that looks at. Well, first of all, we decide that Caucasian doesn't mean what Caucasian actually means, and in deciding that Caucasian means white, ignoring the Caucasians that we don't identify as white, who are acting in these ways as well, right? Because that's the Arabic group. When we're looking at Asia and India, we're seeing that a lot of this is also based on, in India, they have a lot of the need to be light, like they'll even bleach their skin. But it's all based on this idea that this exploitation thought process, this ability to exploit each other and to look for what we can exploit and take from each other, is the right thought process, instead of understanding that we should be looking more towards care for each other than towards take from each other. And it's that Western, and it starts in the Middle East, in the Levant area. It's that Western thought that just kind of appropriates culture from other people and, decides that control based on creating hate and division is the best way to go.
And I would lie, like, Separating to me, you know, I'm going to need you to really understand where I'm coming from, especially based off of my history, right?
Yeah.
Separation for me is not bad. I don't think it's bad. I think we can live apart from each other. You know what I mean? But we can't until we address the issues. Because then we won't, our generations won't know. For instance, there's this thing called BIPOC unity, right?
Yeah.
There is no such thing as BIPOC. Because Black people don't go through the same thing that Indigenous POC go through.
This is true.
We don't. Yeah, we don't. So there, some part we have to separate ourselves from it. We have to be able to say, I understand you guys want BIPOC, but we cannot play that game. Because you can be Indigenous and look like a Spaniard and literally get more privilege than I will ever get in my life because I cannot scrape the skin off of my face.
Yeah, that's very
You know
real.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when I even speak about not to be brought up, sorry.
No, you're fine. No, I think that what you're stating is absolutely correct. I mean, I know myself, I identify as Indigenous and I have Black ancestry, but I won't go into, like, if it's a BIPOC only space, I won't go into it because I'm not a person of color. Well, I have Black and Indigenous ancestry. My light skin automatically grants me a lot of privilege, and it also grants me, or also creates where, unless you know me, you don't know that I'm Black or Indigenous or that I have that ancestry. And so or that I'm Indigenous and work within Indigenous space. So you, I automatically can come across as a threat because people that look like me have caused so much damage, right? And so I won't enter into a BIPOC only space because of that. But you're right. There's so much different experience within different communities. The idea of coming together to kind of remove us from this societal thought process is a positive one. But we also still really need to understand that unity should never mean erasing the indigenous or the individual experiences of communities, right? Like what has happened to Black people within the United States compared to what has happened to Indigenous people within the United States. I mean, not comparison, let's compare, but like the two different situations are completely and utterly different. Even if we look at the fact that Indigenous people in the United States are fighting to maintain the home of their ancestors, and Black people within the United States who were brought over on the transatlantic slave trade and haven't been able to have this disconnection because they were forcefully disconnected, right? And don't have that knowledge sometimes even of who their ancestry is to be able to find that connection, right? Even if we look just in the fact that we're looking at two groups who are generally ancestral worshiping, and one has maintained their ability to know their ancestors, where the other one have had their ancestry ripped from them, right? And so it's very, very important to realize. Well, and that's, when people are like, don't say don't see color, right? I don't see color. It ignores the experience that color brings, right? It ignores that the Black experience is different, you know. And I think that's always very important. We can't monolithicize us. We cannot, as a species, humanity is way too different and unique, and everybody is so individual. Not like we should be individualistic, but everybody has individual talents to bring to the table. You can't make us into a monolithic species or a monolithic culture or a monolithic group. It just shouldn't ever be done that way. I mean, I do believe that, we all come from each other. I do, believe that we've all come from Africa, and that is the scientific side for me. I do also believe in creation stories, and I don't think that anybody's creation story should be disregarded. I think that they just explain things in a way that people can understand. And so, I also, while I believe in the scientific side, also don't find where that discounts true, creation stories. I think that it actually tends to prove creation stories to me. But I think that groups know what they need for their group, especially if you're within a space that is an indigenous space that you've been in, because everybody has indigenous space, right? Space that they were first, um, and or their ancestors were. And I think that everybody understands their indigenous biome on a level that other groups can't. So having groups tend and care for their individual, indigenous biomes, I think even if we were to be able to go to a point of a world government or something like that, or unity across the board as humanity, it should never be unity as in homogeny. We should never unify to the point that we erase original cultures or people's experiences, right?
Exactly. Like, for instance, if you had to dig into your ancestry, would you find Africa in it?
Yes, I would personally, yeah. But
Would you claim that you're African?
no.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's my, when we see people who don't look like us claim something that is of us, it's you're participating in the erasure of my people.
Yeah.
You're literally participating in the erasure of Black African people. And that kills me. It kills me because now I feel like I'm non existent. I feel like my shade comes in your color when I know it doesn't. When I know what has happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and I totally understand that. Well, and that's for me, it's actually why I won't. Like, I can tell you where my grandmother came from. I can tell you when she escaped slavery. I have the birth certificate of the child that was born naming her, as mulatto. I can tell you all of this sort of stuff, but I would never claim to be black because my skin color is not black and I don't experience the black experience within the United States. So I can't, like, what would I be claiming? Half of my siblings are black. Most of my friends are black, but still, it doesn't mean that I, even if I have that ancestry, it doesn't mean that I am, right? Because especially within the United States, black is an experience way more than anything. Like it comes with this level of shared culture experience that you can't experience unless you are, right? So, no, I agree with that 100%. And I do agree as well with that erasure thing, right? Um, I will identify as indigenous because within indigenous, it is about connection and growing up, right, and family, right, and so I have those things, and so that connection is right within the identification of that, and also indigenous in Turtle Island is a wide range of skin color. It was before colonization and doubly so after colonization, um, but so I can claim indigenous, but I could never personally claim black, right? Because it's not that is about an experience that comes with skin tone almost more anymore within the United States than it is about having African ancestry, because the experience here in the United States is so unique to the African experience in these borders. And only like if you've come from Africa after 1950, I have friends from Kenya. If you come from Africa after 1950, the experience, well, there's still a lot of racism. You haven't had the 300 years of slavery, right? You don't have that in your epigenetics, right? So it is an entirely different experience. And while I have it in within my epigenetics, I don't live it today, so I could never claim it, right?
Exactly. It's in the blood memory, it's in our DNA. And even if we go to Kenya and we speak about it, there's an entire tribe that is trying to be considered as an indigenous tribe of Kenya.
Right.
But they're not black. They're Indian. Yeah.
India?
You can research it.
Like,
yep, they're Indian, and they're trying to be considered Indian in Kenya as a tribe. You see what I mean?
Oh no, I do.
You see what I mean when I speak about the erasure?
Yeah.
Because we already know that North Africa looks the way that it looks because of mass breeding farms, infiltration, destruction, We know that. We know that. We know that there's a time period in our ancestral stories. It speaks about how they were barren. They were in a land full of sand and it was barren, and that they needed to go to a place where they would get something to quench their thirst. And so they came to Africa, and they did what they needed to do. And even when we go into the transatlantic slave trade, and we go into the Treaty of Marrakesh, which is the peace and friendship treaty of Britain and Morocco, there's Article 17 to 26 that speaks about how the Queen thanks the Moroccans for building the slave ships. Were the Moroccans black at that time? No. They were Arab. On top of that, the Moroccan, I'm going to call him a king because it wasn't like presidents at the time, but the king called the queen of empire Sultana Isabel. If you want to research that, Sultana Isabel, and why he called her that, it was the coming together of the Christian and Islamic people of Africa to overthrow what was going on in Spain, etc. Because, a lot of people like saying, oh yeah, the Moors conquered Spain. The Moors were not just black.
Yeah.
The Moors who were black were were in Islam, they were Muslim. And then two, they were also Arab.
Yeah.
In general. Yeah. So when you see that black hair, you know what I mean? It's coming from that genetic. You
Absolutely.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Spain looks different because of the Arab influence and the Moorish influence, which was also a mixture of Arab and Islamic black people who had taken on the Islamic faith because of what the Arab slave trade did to Africa. And let's also not act like the Arab slave trade ended. Because right now, in 2023, we have an entire slave trade in Libya.
Yeah.
In Libya. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you see why I say we need to move past the always calling out white people?
Absolutely.
Always calling out white people. We need to move past it. Where do we get now where we're calling out the Arabs? But no, people are afraid. And not only white people are afraid, black people are afraid too of calling out Arabs for what they have done. They're afraid of calling out the Asians. They're afraid of calling out the Indians. We're afraid. We're so scared. I don't know why.
I know why.
I explain it as
even here, especially. And it's because people, these are all groups within the United States borders that we've identified as being marginalized within the United States borders, right? These are all groups that within the U.S. we think of, have been harmed within the U.S., right? For being part of what we consider marginalized communities within the U.S. And so people are afraid that if they speak out against these groups, that it'll be like hate against Muslims instead of hating the practice that Arabs are doing in this country, right? It's the same thing like in Israel and Palestine, where people are like calling out the Israeli government, and everybody's like, "Oh, you can't do that. That's anti-Judaic." And it's like, no, I have no problem with Judaism. I have a problem with its governmental structure, right? And so they don't want to say that the Asians are doing wrong things, or that the Indian people are doing wrong things, or that the Arabic people are doing wrong things, because then it starts to sound like they're committing a hate crime, like they're bashing marginalized groups. Which you're absolutely right. We should be identifying it in every space. There ain't no color, culture, or creed without greed. We have all internalized greed. We have all internalized exploitation, and so we should be. You're right. But that's why I would say that is probably why, is because everybody's afraid that if they call out what's considered marginalized groups, that they'll be identified as hate speech or as being hateful towards those marginalized groups.
But imagine when you're telling the truth. You're just telling the truth, but now you're met with hate speech, racism. For instance, what happened to South Africa, right? Where I'm from, where we were just talking about the Kwe and Gam people.